If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 41, one of the Dragonite clan's aces. Lan, where are you going? Iris's voice called out from behind him. Keep up, Will said without turning back, using his tail to hook the pocket of the little girl's clothes and lead her along. Since he couldn't find the scyther right away, he had no choice but to switch targets. And he had already chosen his next candidate, the Pokémon he had seen the moment he opened his eyes in this life, Magikarp. To be more specific, Magikarp's evolved form, Gyarados. The Pokémon Gyarados needs no introduction. Even people who don't know much about Pokémon have probably heard its name. Evolving a Magikarp into a Gyarados isn't difficult, it just needs to reach around LV20. For a Magikarp with almost no offensive power, evolving through solo battles is indeed hard. They basically have to rely on natural growth. But if Will were to take a Magikarp along to his group battles, the process would not be difficult at all. If there was one difficulty, it was that Gyarados has a violent temperament and is not suitable for a novice trainer to raise. As a member of the Dragonite clan, how could you not have a Gyarados, right? Will muttered to himself as he headed towards the lake from his memory. Gyarados was a staple ace for the future champion of both Kanto and Johto, Lance. It also held a crucial position on the team of the Blackthorn gym leader, Claire. In the games, out of the 14 versions Lance appeared in, Gyarados was on his team in 12 of them, only absent in Black 2 and White 2. To put it bluntly, Gyarados had become one of the essential aces for members of the Dragonite clan, its status second only to their symbol, Dragonite. Therefore, the potential of Gyarados needed no further explanation. However, although its name contained the character for dragon, it did not have the dragon type. Its types were water and flying. Though a flying Gyarados did appear in Pokémon Legends, Arceus, in other games, the anime and the manga, it was generally considered unable to fly. The only flying type move it could learn was Hurricane. It was a Pokémon that didn't quite live up to its name. Lan, look! That Pokémon is so cute! Iris's voice sounded by his ear. Will shifted his gaze and hesitated. It was a Marill. Marill itself wasn't very famous, but its evolution, Azumarill, had quite the reputation, the Dragon Slayer. Marill was on Will's list of backup Pokémon. Forget it. After a moment's hesitation, Will decided to pass on it for now. Azumarill's reputation was significant, but not that exaggerated, and its strength was highly dependent on having the huge power ability. And if its opponent wasn't a dragon type, its effectiveness was very limited. In Will's opinion, it wasn't a particularly worthwhile Pokémon to raise. At least, with other, better options available, he wouldn't choose to bring one back for Liz or Iris. They continued forward, arriving at the lake without any trouble. Wait here, Will said, stuffing Iris into a nearby bush with his tail. He looked around to make sure no other Pokémon would appear anytime soon, then dove headfirst into the lake. Gyarados are not common, but Magikarp are everywhere. It's said that in ancient times, Magikarp were very powerful. For some reason, they traded their strength for vitality and reproductive ability. The Magikarp of today are weak, but they reproduce at an astonishing rate and can survive in any quality of water. They are basically the cockroaches of the aquatic world, even described in the Pokédex as so numerous you get sick of seeing them. So, even in this small lake, one could find plenty of Magikarp. In fact, it was easier to find them in a place like this. In the open sea, they were just food for other Pokémon. But in this lake, they were at least near the top of the food chain. Will scanned the water and spotted about a dozen Magikarp. You two will do, he quickly decided on his targets. The two Magikarp were 2.1 meters and 2 meters long, respectively. This length was more than double the value listed in the Pokédex, which meant their levels were already quite high, and they might not be far from evolving. Will had no intention of communicating with them. Magikarp were too dumb. It wasn't just their strength that had degenerated, but their intelligence as well. Only after evolving did their intelligence improve slightly. Will felt that talking to them would be pointless. It was better to just knock them out first and then tame them through feeding. No sooner said than done. Will shot forward and hit them with two dragon tails, knocking both Magikarp out instantly. He then coiled his tail around them and flew out of the lake. Lan. Seeing Will emerge, Iris quickly ran over. She soon noticed the two large red fish held in his tail, but she wasn't particularly curious. She just figured he was hungry and wanted to eat some fish. She had, however, never seen such large fish before. Get on. Time to go, Will said, lowering his head. Are we leaving already? Iris understood his meaning. She awkwardly climbed onto his head in her puffy clothes and grabbed the feathery wings on either side. Catching 2 today is more than enough, Will said, taking off and flying towards the capital. Originally, he had planned to catch them one by one, with the scyther being today's goal. But since he couldn't find a scyther, catching Magikarp was just as good. He had to catch them sooner or later anyway. This way, he could catch 2 at once, one for Liz and one for Iris. As for the feeding, that had to be done by Liz and Iris personally. If it were other Pokémon, Will could use communication to get them to accept Liz and Iris as their trainers. But that wouldn't work with Magikarp. Their intelligence was too low for a conversation to be meaningful. It would take a Magikarp many days to even remember who was feeding it and grow fond of them. If Will did the feeding, the Magikarp would become attached to him, not Liz and Iris. When they evolved into Gyarados, with their famously violent tempers, there was no way they would listen to the girls. Will did not want to come back from fighting on the front lines only to find that Liz and Iris had been beaten up by their own Gyarados. That would be a real mess. Another half hour passed, and Will returned to the palace with Iris. He first dropped the 2 still unconscious Magikarp into the backyard pond. A maid working in the yard looked at him, completely bewildered, wondering what kind of trouble the young master was getting into now. Wait here, Will said, placing Iris next to the pond. He himself flew up to the window of the second-floor study. Knock, knock. Liz, inside the study, heard the knocking and turned her head in confusion. Lan. Startled by the large face outside her window, Liz quickly opened it. Shouldn't you be at school? Did you skip again? Lan, you're not being a good boy. Do you want to be? What school? Get over here, Will interrupted her lecturing and unceremoniously wrapped his tail around her, pulling her out of the study. Liz sighed helplessly. She finally understood now, this was the feeling of powerlessness Lan must have felt when he was little, being carried around by them. Chapter 42, This fish might be a beast. And that's it. Under Will's supervision, Liz and Iris each completed the feeding of their Magikarp. 1 or 2 feedings might not make an impression, but after a few more, the Magikarp would begin to remember them. For a trainer, a Magikarp's simple mind was both an advantage and a disadvantage. The disadvantage was the difficulty in getting from 0 to 1 the initial bond. Even after being defeated and captured, it might take a Magikarp a while to even realize it has a trainer. But the advantage was the ease of raising their affection. Once that initial 1 was reached, the process of getting from 1 to 255 was much faster than with other Pokémon. Without a doubt, the most difficult Pokémon to raise affection with were psychic types. Most of them were very intelligent, and some could even sense human emotions and thoughts. Yes. I'll remind you again in the evening, Will said, peeking into the pond. The 2 Magikarp had no reaction to seeing him, they didn't even know he was the one who had knocked them out. After that, Will didn't rush to take the 2 Magikarp out for training. The primary task now was to build a decent level of affection between them and the 2 girls. It had to be high enough that after evolving, the Gyarados would still recognize them as their trainers and not attack them. If their affection was too low upon evolution, the Gyarados might not even recognize Liz and Iris and could lash out. Therefore, Will didn't go running around for the rest of the day. Instead, he kept Liz by his side, forcing her to play with the dopey red fish. As for Iris, the little girl was already quite curious about such a large fish and was happily hugging her Magikarp's head, staring deeply into its beady eyes. Someone, come, Liz said, not quite understanding Will's actions, but she felt that with the intelligence he had shown since he was a baby, he wouldn't be doing something pointless. Your Majesty. Go and fetch the 2 scholars. Have them take a look at this fish. Yes, Your Majesty. Soon, 2 beast scholars arrived at the palace backyard. Your Majesty. X2. These 2 fish, is there anything special about them? Well, this kind of fish might be a primal beast. The 2 scholars exchanged a look, their faces troubled. Might be. Liz asked, her eyes full of confusion. What a strange thing to say. The difference between a beast and a normal animal was enormous. The easiest way to tell was just to look at their combat ability. What did might be mean? This, according to our research, this type of beast is weaker than the vast majority of other beasts. Never mind facing other beasts, they have almost no fighting ability even against ordinary wild animals. They are, by all accounts, the weakest beast we have ever seen, one of the scholars said, scratching his head as he relayed their findings. However, their vitality and some other characteristics do indeed meet the criteria to be classified as a beast. Will listened from the side without saying a word. Magikarp were indeed very weak. They didn't learn tackle until LV15, before that, they were worse than a common animal. If not for this, Magikarp wouldn't have been reduced to surviving on tiny fish, shrimp, or even plankton. Why did Lan catch them? Liz murmured to herself, gently stroking Will. Based on her understanding of him, it couldn't possibly be for a reason as simple as keeping them as pets or fattening them up to eat later. But she really couldn't guess why he would capture two useless beasts. The two beast scholars remained silent. To be honest, if even Liz didn't know what Will was planning, then it was likely no one in the world could guess. You'll know in the future, Will said, nudging the top of Liz's head with his nose. Oh well. I'll find out eventually, Liz said, standing on her tiptoes to rub her cheek against his, giving up on thinking about it. No matter what, she trusted his judgment. Iris, after playing for a while, quickly lost interest in her Magikarp. All it did was splash around, it wasn't fun at all. Lan. In the end, Iris returned to Will's embrace. Lan, I have to get back. I still have a lot of things to do, Liz said, looking up at him. She had been stuck here because every time she tried to leave, Will would use his tail to coil her back. She could tell he wanted her to interact with the fish, but she really did have work to do. Will tilted his head, thinking for a moment. Then, he remembered something. He flew back to his and Liz's bedroom on his own and moved the large fish tank into her study. Only then did he return and deliver both Liz and her Magikarp back to the room. I guess I'm raising a fish now, Liz said, looking at the fish tank next to her desk and shaking her head helplessly. The Magikarp swam happily in the large tank, occasionally stopping to stare at her. Will watched this scene and nodded with satisfaction. This way, even while working, Liz could be in the Magikarp's presence. Even if she did nothing, its affection for her would gradually rise. But to speed up the process, Will made a special trip to the kitchen and brought back some shrimp and other aquatic creatures, placing them next to her desk. When Liz got tired from work, she could take a break by feeding her Magikarp, which would both relax her and raise its affection. Two birds with one stone. I've worried myself sick for this family, Will sighed, shaking his head. He then flew back to the backyard to find Iris. The problem with Liz's Magikarp was solved, but Iris's was not. Iris usually stayed at her own home, where Will couldn't supervise her. The little girl didn't come to the palace every day, maybe only 2 or 3 times a week. At this rate, the affection between her and her Magikarp would increase very slowly, if at all. It's time to bust out the cuteness technique, Will thought, finally coming up with a solution after much deliberation. In the evening, it was time for Iris to go home. Auntie, Lan, I'll come play again next time, said Iris, who had played with Will all day. She wiped her small face and waved goodbye to Liz and Will, who were seeing her off. Of course. You're always welcome, Liz nodded gently. But at that moment, Will's tail shot out and coiled around Iris, pulling her back. Ying! Will hugged Iris, like a child clutching a beloved toy, unwilling to let go. Mwah! Seeing Will so close, Iris seized the opportunity and planted a big kiss on him. Lan? Iris has to go home now. She'll be back in a few days, Liz said, looking at Will strangely. They had said their goodbyes many times before, but Will had never acted like this. Liz instinctively felt that something was off, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Mostly, seeing Will and Iris so close made her feel a little jealous, which clouded her thinking. Ying! Will cried out, then carried the squirming Iris back into the palace. He took her to an empty bedroom and tucked her into the bed. Liz, who had followed them, finally understood his intention. Do you want Iris to stay here? I want to stay here. Iris said quickly, clutching the blanket with only the top half of her head showing. If she could live in the palace from now on, she could play with Lan more often. She was going to use Will's affection as a pretext to stay. No way. Your parents will be worried. Ying! Auntie! Will and Iris simultaneously used cuteness technique on Liz. Well, just for one night. It was super effective. Chapter 43, Liz's Suspicion. Although Iris was now staying at the palace, she did not get to sleep with Will. It wasn't that she didn't want to. In fact, she wanted to very much and even tried using her cuteness technique on Liz multiple times. But on this point, Liz did not yield in the slightest. With the excuse, if you two are together, will anyone get any sleep? She firmly rejected Iris's request, rendering her cuteness technique completely ineffective. In the end, Will still slept comfortably nestled with Liz on their new, larger bed. The next morning, Will woke up early on his own. This time, he was awake even before Liz. After evolving into a dragonair, his body seemed to no longer require long periods of sleep to promote growth. The sound of Liz's breathing near his ear tickled the feathery wings on his head, and he couldn't help but twitch them. Flutter, flutter. That little twitch, however, was enough to wake Liz up. Lan? You're up so early today, Liz murmured, opening her eyes groggily. She subconsciously leaned over and gently kissed Will's cheek. This was a habit she had developed when he was still a Dratini. Most of the time, however, Will had been asleep, so he had never known that the first thing Liz did upon waking was give him a good morning kiss. Get up. Time to feed the Magikarp, Will said, floating up from the bed and flicking off the covers. The cold air brushed against Liz's neck, making her shiver. Lan, I want to stay under the covers a little longer, Liz said, hugging herself and trembling on the bed. Will turned his head and glanced out the window. The sky was just beginning to lighten, the sun wasn't even out yet. All right, Will said, pulling the covers back over Liz. At the same time, he extended his long tail from under the blanket, grabbed the clothes Liz had hung on the side of the bed, and pulled them under the covers to warm them up. It was a trick Will used to do for himself during the winters in his past life. Returning to the warm bed, Liz immediately hugged him. Will closed his eyes and waited for another half an hour before getting up again. This time, Liz obediently put on the warm clothes and got out of bed. Will then coiled his tail around her and carried her to Iris's bedroom. Thump! Will rammed his head into the bedroom door and used his mouth to yank the blankets off the sleeping Iris and onto the floor. Nghh. The sudden blast of cold air shocked the sleeping Iris fully awake. Will dropped Liz onto the bed and then threw Iris's clothes over as well. The meaning was obvious, he wanted Liz to help Iris get dressed. His tail wasn't suited for such delicate work. 5 minutes later, a confused Liz and a still drowsy Iris were led by Will to feed their respective Magikarp. Is Lan trying to get me to bond with this beast? Liz wondered, watching Will stare at her intently as she fed the Magikarp. Feeding a Magikarp was a trivial matter that could be left to others. But Will had specifically woken her up and made her do it personally. This action forced Liz to consider his motives. Yes, Will nodded. He had to admit, Liz had some rapport with him to be able to guess his objective. The act of feeding is crucial for strengthening the relationship between a trainer and their Pokémon. Previously, when Liz had arranged for Hestia to feed him, it had been an improper move. It only worked out because Will's soul and consciousness were that of a human. If he had really been a newborn Pokémon whose cognition was not yet fully developed, he would have likely mistaken Hestia for his trainer and refused to listen to Liz. The most obvious example was the Pokémon at the academy. If their owners and the scholars gave them an order at the same time, the Pokémon would subconsciously obey the scholar first. This was because from a young age, they spent most of their time with the scholars. Their check UPS, feedings, and training were all done with the scholars, so of course, they would see them as their real trainers. I understand. I'll interact with the Magikarp more from now on, Liz said, finally confirming his intention after seeing him nod. Although she didn't fully understand why, if it was what Will wanted, she would certainly do it. You won't regret it, Will said with a slight smile. Because of their communication barrier, he couldn't explain the full reason why she had to personally raise the Magikarp. But once it evolved into a Gyarados, he was sure that with her intelligence, she would figure it out. On the other side, Iris wasn't much trouble either. Although the little girl didn't understand and couldn't guess his thoughts, she was obedient. When Will told her to feed the fish, she fed the fish. She even took the initiative to gently stroke the Magikarp's head. After the feeding was done, Will prepared to head to MT Silver again. This time, it wasn't to catch Pokémon, but to train. Iris, let's go, Will said, coiling his tail around her and flying into the sky. Of course, he had to bring his personal experience boost card with him. With the bonus from Iris's Dragon Force, his battles were easier, and he gained more experience. Lan. I have flower arranging class today. Iris protested, patting his tail with her small hands. What's the point of flower arranging class? What good is that? It's much better to come with me and fight other Pokémon. It'll broaden your horizons. Will rolled his eyes. War was on the horizon, and she was still learning flower arranging. Flower arranging couldn't save the Dragonite Kingdom. If Iris followed him, with her cleverness, she should be able to observe and learn something about Pokémon battles. That was the kind of knowledge that would actually be useful in the future. Lan. Take me home. Or my mother will spank me. It's fine. She's not spanking me. Half an hour later, Will arrived at MT Silver with a resigned Iris. I guess I'll just challenge those alphas, Will decided. He knew very well what kind of Pokémon he needed to defeat to get a large amount of experience. Besides, in the outer areas of MT Silver, only the alpha Pokémon of the various territories had the ability to fight him. He battled until noon, at which point he suddenly realized the little girl had a lunch problem. He could eat berries in the wild, it was a habit from his first life. But Iris couldn't. The little girl, who had been pampered and raised in the capital, was not as tough as the Liz from his past life. Eating berries for one meal should be fine, Will said, casually picking some oran and tangleberries for her. Iris ate them happily, without any complaints. Although she had a princess's life, she didn't have a princess's spoiled attitude. She was a bit annoying at first, but she's actually a pretty good kid, Will thought, his heart softening a little as he watched her obediently gnaw on the berries. A princess of the great Dragonite Kingdom was now miserably eating berries in a forest with him. Lan, I'm a little tired, Iris said after lunch, leaning wearily against Will and closing her eyes. Being woken up so early, then spending the morning running around a dangerous forest, was a bit much for an 8-year-old girl. The half-hour flight through the sky was particularly grueling. But Iris hadn't complained once from beginning to end and had obediently let him carry her everywhere. It seemed she really was extremely fond of Lan. Then sleep for a while. I'll take you home when you wake up. Looking at Iris's sleepy face, Will coiled the lower half of his body around her, protecting the little girl so she could nap in peace. He had made a decision. For the time being, it was better to take Iris back to the Primal Beast Academy to train. The sub-adult Pokémon there could still give him a decent fight for a while. Although the leveling speed might not be as fast as training in MT Silver, it would be much easier on Iris. If she got tired or hungry, he could fly her back home in just 5 minutes, allowing her to enjoy delicious food or sleep comfortably in the palace. Chapter 44, Challenging the Academy's Top Dog. That night, thanks to the combined cuteness technique of Will and Iris, Liz finally agreed to let Iris live at the palace permanently. If Liz hadn't personally spoken up, Iris's mother would have never agreed to let her stay. Having received her mother's approval, Iris was so excited that she couldn't sleep a wink that night. Inevitably, she spent the next day sleeping soundly. Since he didn't have to worry about Iris, Will took the opportunity to go to MT Silver by himself. He scouted a little deeper into the middle ring, confirming the terrain and Pokémon distribution, and also selected his next capture target. Half a month passed quietly. Without being actively led into battles, the two Magikarp naturally did not evolve. They probably hadn't even gained a single level. But the good news was that their intelligence hadn't seemed to degenerate to the same level as their future era of League's counterparts. It only took them 3 or 4 days to remember Liz and Iris. When the girls came to feed them, the two Magikarp would even proactively swim up to greet them. By the 10th day, they could even follow simple commands. This was very gratifying for Will. If it weren't for the Magikarp, he wouldn't have had to use his cuteness technique on Liz to force Iris to stay at the palace. At noon. Lan. Wake up. Iris came running into Liz's bedroom and threw herself onto the curled-up Will on the bed. So noisy, Will said, opening his eyes with a sigh. Ever since Iris had moved into the palace, he hadn't once been able to wake up naturally from his afternoon nap. But maybe that was a good thing, it kept him from getting lazy. Let's go, to the Primal Beast Academy. This afternoon, we're going to fight that big dinosaur with the flower on its neck. Iris said, excitedly shaking Will's head. Why are you more excited than I am? Will asked as he rose. Iris's arms were still wrapped around his head, so she was left dangling in mid-air. The little girl wasn't afraid of getting hurt, though. 3 months had been enough time for her to develop complete trust in Will. It was the kind of blind, unconditional trust a child has for a parent, no less than the trust Liz, who slept with him every night, had for him. A Meganium, this won't be an easy fight, Will thought. He used his tail to pluck Iris off his head and then flew out the window. The big dinosaur Iris was talking about was the grass-type starter from the Johto region, Meganium. It was a brilliantly colored Meganium, standing 4 meters tall. In the era of leagues, it was the kind of Pokémon that would earn praise for being well raised. Probably because its biology was more plant-like, the scholar's methods of raising it like a plant had yielded excellent results. This Meganium was currently the strongest student at the academy. Will estimated its level was approaching 40. His own level was only 32. The gap was not small, which was why he felt it would be a tough fight. But if I don't fight it today, I might not get another chance. That one is probably about to graduate and become a regular soldier. Will carried Iris and quickly flew to the academy's lawn. From the sky, he immediately spotted the Meganium. Lan. Over there. Let's go fight it. Iris's excited voice came from his tail. At the same time, the buff from the dragon force suddenly flowed into Will's body. Will descended to the ground, placed the little girl on the grass to the side, and then approached the Meganium, who was already staring at him. At the same time, more and more Pokémon began to gather around to watch. A fight, the Meganium asked, clearly having guessed Will's intention. Will had already fought everyone in the entire academy, only she remained undefeated. In a way, she was the strongest of the reserve troops, the boss. That was why so many Pokémon had come to watch. If Will defeated her, he would be the new boss. From then on, the entire academy would be his turf. It would be up to other Pokémon to challenge him. If a new Pokémon ever disrespected him, he wouldn't even have to lift a finger, the other students would teach the newcomer a lesson. Yes, Will nodded, his mind already racing, formulating a battle strategy. The level difference between him and the Meganium was too great. He had to make good use of his only advantage, type matchups. He had the Ice-type move Icy Wind, which was super effective against Grass types, and his own Dragon type gave him a 2x resistance to Meganium's Grass-type moves. Although the Meganium was female, she had a fiery temper. Razor Leaf. Confirming Will's intent, she immediately shook the petals on her neck, and a volley of spinning leaves shot towards him. Will pushed off the ground with the lower half of his body, his tail powerfully shoving the lawn, launching himself into the air and narrowly dodging the attack. A large body wasn't always a good thing, as it also made for a larger target. If he hadn't been so agile, that move would have hit him. Leer. An invisible wave emanated from Will's 2 aqua-blue eyes. In the games, this move could lower the target's defense by making them feel fear. But in reality, it wasn't so simple. Against reckless or overly bold Pokémon, this move was basically useless, it couldn't make them feel fear at all. For example, the 2 dopey Magikarp back at the palace could completely ignore his leer. The Meganium shuddered under Will's gaze, a hint of fear in its heart. It worked, Will thought with a grin. Agility. He seized the opportunity, increasing his speed and rapidly closing the distance to the Meganium. Focus energy. Only Will himself knew how useful this move, inherited from his first life as a Beedrill, was in a real battle. In the games, because it wasted a turn, it wasn't used very often. Although its effect was weaker in reality, increasing the critical hit rate instead of guaranteeing one, there were no turns in reality. As it was now, as long as his proficiency was high enough, he could even use the move while moving. The Meganium was not about to just stand there and take it. Petal Dance. Its flower bloomed, and countless pink blossoms formed from grass-type energy materialized out of thin air, converging into a small, spinning tornado that shot towards Will. Twister. Will was forced to halt his advance. He whipped his tail forward, and a blue and white tornado was quickly unleashed. At the same time, he rapidly adjusted his position, circling around from above. The level difference was too great, his twister couldn't possibly cancel out the Meganium's petal dance. He was only using it to slow the attack down, buying himself time to dodge. The Meganium's gaze was still focused on the point where the 2 skills collided. It didn't even notice that Will was already closing in from the sky. The disadvantage of not having a trainer, it's just too obvious, Will grinned, an ice blue light gathering in his mouth. Icy Wind. Chapter 45, Conquering the Academy. If it had a trainer's command, then with Meganium's natural move pool making good use of moves like Growl, Poison Powder, Reflect, Leech Seed, Light Screen, and Synthesis, it would have been incredibly easy to defeat a Dragonair by leveraging its level advantage and naturally high defenses. Even a trainer like Ash, who wasn't great at using such moves, could have at least warned the Meganium to evade Will's attack from above, preventing the subsequent damage. They. The surge of ice blue cold energy slammed down on top of the Meganium's head. The Ice-type attack dealt double damage to the Grass-type, and even with the level difference, the blow was extremely painful. Unfortunately, the attack was not a critical hit. The effect of focus energy had likely been applied to the twister he used earlier. Dragon Tail. Will did not stop after the first successful hit. He seized the moment of pained paralysis and whipped his long tail around. In a real-time battle, there was no rule that you had to wait for your opponent's turn. A faint purple light glowed from Will's tail as the powerful appendage lashed out, striking the Meganium's chest and dealing a second blow. A large physique, while increasing the area that could be hit, also increased one's attack range and the area of effect of one's skills. It had its pros and cons, which varied for different Pokémon. For Pokémon like Venusaur, Torterra, and Torkoal, who were not adept at dodging and would choose to tank hits anyway, the bigger they were, the better. After taking 2 consecutive hits, the Meganium was clearly not in good shape. First, it was hit by a 2x super effective Ice-type move, and then by a physical Dragon-type move. And that was after Will had used Leer to lower its physical defense. The Meganium was clearly getting angry. In a rage, countless pink petals shot out from the large flower on its neck, dancing on the wind as they drifted towards Will. Petal Dance. This was a powerful Grass-type move that Meganium learned naturally upon evolution, with the power equivalent to Solar Beam. Both moves had their pros and cons. In the games, Solar Beam was clearly more useful, but in a real battle, it was hard to say. The reason the word drifted was used to describe the petals was that their trajectory was unpredictable. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes gracefully weaving, sometimes surging forward in a violent rush, and the attack would continue for some time. It was an incredibly difficult move to dodge. In a limited space, even teleport wouldn't be effective. A move like Protect would be useless too. In reality, it could only block the first hit, but Petal Dance attacked countless times. At this moment, Will had no good way of dealing with this skill. TCH. Will twisted and turned in the air with great effort but was still hit by many of the petals, sustaining some damage. If he could learn a move like Dig, he could have very easily dodged them. Good chance, Will thought, enduring the end of the Petal Dance's effect. He looked at the Meganium, which had now fallen into a state of confusion. This was the drawback of Petal Dance. After using it, the user would enter a temporary state of confusion. In this state, a Pokémon would lose control of its body. What move it used, and who it used it on, was completely up to luck. Focus Energy. Icy Wind. Taking advantage of the ample time, Will once again used his combo, unleashing the Ice-type move on the Meganium, which was just shaking its head in a daze. The confused Meganium's luck was clearly not very good. In its confusion, it actually used the move Tackle, charging headfirst into the icy wind that was blasting towards it. Super effective. A critical hit. The Meganium cried out in pain, staggered 2 steps, and then collapsed to the ground. The combination of a super effective type matchup and a critical hit had finished it off. A victor had been decided. Lan is the strongest. Iris, who had been watching the whole time, suddenly jumped out, ran over, and hugged Will, giving him 2 big kisses. She was even more excited than Will was. Anyone who didn't know better would have thought she was the new strongest student at the academy. Personal status. Dragonair. Potential, Purple. Level, 33. Type, Dragon. Ability, Shed Skin. Height, 9 m. Weight, 38 kilograms. Moves, Focus Energy, Inherited, Wrap, Leer, Twister, Thunder Wave, Dragon Tail, Agility, Slam, Icy Wind, Aqua Tail. I leveled up, as expected, and learned Aqua Tail. My type coverage is even wider now, Will said, a happy smile spreading across his face as he looked at his status. He had overcome a level gap of at least 7 or 8 levels to defeat the Meganium, and he had the growth bonus from the Dragon Force. If that didn't get him a level up, then he would have had a right to be angry. All around them. Moo. Awoo. Roar. One by one, the Pokémon let out triumphant, meaningless roars. They were likely celebrating the birth of the new hegemon of the Primal Beast Academy. In a bush far away, the pair of spying scholars looked on, clicking their tongues. If I remember correctly, wasn't Lord Lan a milk-drinking baby just over 3 months ago? Yes. So, in 3 months, he's grown to the point where he's ready for the battlefield. Yes. The two scholars looked at each other, seeing the shock in the other's eyes. They had been at this academy for 3 years. The Meganium had entered the academy at the same time they had. This meant that Will had reached in just over 3 months a level that had taken the Meganium 36 months to achieve. Even the most talented beast should have a limit. There must be a reason for Lord Lan's rapid growth. If we're talking about what makes Lord Lan different from other beasts, it's undoubtedly his warlike nature. Other sub-adult beasts might only have 2 or 3 battle training sessions a week, but Lord Lan has been having 4 or 5 battles a day since he just left his infant stage. The most ridiculous time, he had 17 battles in one day. One of the scholars took out his observation notebook. On it were the data they had secretly recorded. In terms of diet, he didn't think the specially made beast food at the academy was any worse than what was served at the palace. So, diet could be ruled out. That only left one other difference, battling. So, Lord Lan's constant fighting wasn't for nothing. It can drastically accelerate his growth rate. Lord Lan has always been smarter than other beasts, he must have known this, which is why he fought so frequently. This is a huge discovery. To think that beasts have this characteristic. The two scholars looked at each other excitedly. They had discovered something incredible. In this world, whether human or animal, everyone grew naturally. Battling didn't accelerate their growth, it could even have the opposite effect. But they had never imagined that Pokémon were different from humans and ordinary animals. They could accumulate experience through battle to accelerate their growth. We must report this discovery to Lady Liz at once. Yes. With this information, we might be able to make our beast army far stronger than the Kingdom of the Lands. Chapter 46, A New Path. That night, as expected, the two beast scholars requested an audience at the palace. They had compiled all their speculations and discoveries and presented them to Liz. Liz was also quite surprised by Will's growth rate. Although he was her beast, she wasn't by his side during the day. Therefore, she wasn't aware of the changes in his strength. To suddenly learn that his power had reached a level sufficient for him to graduate from the academy was a pleasant surprise. But what she cared about more, of course, was the report itself. After reading its contents, Liz realized its immense importance and immediately convened a meeting that lasted late into the night. The next day, Will woke up early as usual, but felt a sense of listlessness. He had already beaten everyone at the Primal Beast Academy. Although he could still gain experience by repeatedly battling the same opponents, the amount would surely diminish with each fight. Besides, he didn't think any of those beasts would accept his challenge again. When a weaker party challenges a stronger one, it's a challenge. When a stronger party challenges a weaker one, it's something else entirely. MT Silver is pretty far. The trip would be very tiring for Iris, Will thought, rolling over in bed. As he turned, he saw Liz's sleeping face. From a human perspective, Liz was a great beauty, the kind of hardcore beauty that needed no makeup or filters. Looking at her, Will couldn't resist the urge to tease her. He lifted his tail and gently scraped the tip along her neck. Lan, stop it, I'm so sleepy, Liz's sleepy voice murmured. She burrowed her head under the covers and snuggled up closer, burying her face in Will's soft, warm chest. Will stopped his mischief. Liz had gone to bed late last night, so she was bound to be more tired today. He decided to let her get some proper sleep. And so, Will closed his eyes again, content to just lie in bed with her. At the same time, he considered if there was any place that could temporarily replace the academy and MT Silver as a transitional training ground. Pidgeot. Outside the window, the cry of a Pidgeotto or a Pidgeot sounded. Will's half-closed eyes snapped open, an idea sparking in his mind. The sound reminded him of the end of his first life, of being torn apart by that Pidgeot. But the image was fleeting. What truly jolted him awake was the memory of where he had been attacked, the plains. The Kanto and Johto regions are mostly plains and plateaus. While the Pokémon density in these places is low, the terrain is vast. The total number of Pokémon definitely won't be small. Will turned his head to look out the window. The capital of the Dragonite Kingdom was built on a huge plain. He remembered that on his flights to MT Silver, he had seen Pokémon on the grasslands below several times. Since MT Silver is not an option for now, I'll just train on the plains, Will decided. The plains were right outside the city, very close. The flight wouldn't be tiring for Iris. Training on the plains had its advantages. The terrain was open, making it almost impossible to be ambushed. Because there were few places to hide, Will would be able to spot any approaching Pokémon immediately. For both him and Iris, the plains were relatively safe. But the disadvantages were also obvious. Finding suitable targets would be difficult. The plains were vast, and the Pokémon were scattered. And even if he found some, their levels might not be right for him to use as experience packs. Too strong or too weak were both no good. In this respect, it couldn't compare to the tiered environment of MT Silver, where the Pokémon were densely and regularly distributed. The deeper you went, the higher their levels. There, he wouldn't have to search for targets at all, because everyone was a target. I should at least give it a try, Will decided on his next plan. He wouldn't stay at the academy, but he wouldn't go to MT Silver either. Instead, he would forge a new path and check out the nearby plains first. Half an hour passed, and Liz woke up. She immediately rushed to her office. It seemed she had some urgent and important matters to attend to these past couple of days. Will, meanwhile, coiled his tail around his little tool, Iris, and began to search for prey on the plains near the capital. His luck was good. He quickly discovered a wild Ampharos swarm. The leader of this swarm was a massive Ampharos, nearly 3 meters tall. Besides the leader, there were about 7 or 8 other Ampharos, and dozens of Fluffy and Mariup. The scale of this Ampharos swarm was quite large. In the era of leagues, it would be rare to see such a large wild herd, you'd mostly only see them on human-run farms. Not far from the Ampharos swarm, there was a Dragonite Kingdom outpost. Generally, as long as the Ampharos didn't cause trouble for the kingdom wouldn't want to provoke this powerful beast swarm either. Lan. Look down there. Those little sheep are so cute. Iris's innocent voice called out from his tail. The Ampharos line does have good looks. The Pokémon distribution on the plains is really different from the forest. This is promising, Will nodded, looking at the swarm below. The Ampharos line was one that would almost never appear in the bloody and cruel forest. Their habits and preferences were not suited for forest life. The grasslands were a paradise for the peace-loving Ampharos family. Setting aside their strength for a moment, their popularity was quite high, thanks to their cute, non-threatening appearance and their generally warm and patient nature. In the official popularity polls of his old world, the first stage, Mariup, had ranked 16th among electric-type Pokémon, while the third stage, Ampharos, had ranked 5th. Number 1 was Pikachu, for obvious reasons. Besides the Ampharos line, Will figured he could probably find other Pokémon that loved to run and graze on the plains, like Tauros, Ponyta, Doduo, and Rehorn. Lan, let's go down and see. I want to hug those little sheep. You have a way, right? Iris stared at the Mariup and Fluffy below, practically drooling with desire. You little. Will glanced at the girl, exasperated. Generally speaking, not just children, but even adults wouldn't dare to recklessly approach a primal beast. Although Mariup and Fluffy didn't look aggressive, they were still proper beasts. Who would dare to just walk up to them? But Iris was not only bold, she was also clever. She wanted to pet the Mariup and Fluffy, but she knew it was dangerous, so she asked Will, who was also a beast, for help, hoping he could go and negotiate for her. Lan. Iris reached out and rubbed the tail that was coiled around her, trying to coax him. Oh, fine. As it happens, the levels of those Ampharos don't look low. It's a good chance to test their strength, Will sighed in resignation. He then carried Iris and flew downwards, landing at a spot that was neither too close nor too far from the Ampharos family. The position was just right. It wouldn't make them overly vigilant or provoke an attack, but it would allow them to notice his presence. Chapter 47, Training with the Ampharos Chief. The largest Ampharos in the herd stepped forward. Pharos? He asked, looking warily at the massive Dragonair. Ying, Will stated his purpose directly, he was here to issue a challenge. He couldn't tell the Ampharos's level just by its size, but with such a large herd, he was sure the leader's level wouldn't be lower than 50. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to grow to this scale on the plains. Omnivorous creatures that also roamed these grasslands, like Persian and Houndoom, wouldn't mind an occasional meal of lamb. Feroz? Feroz. The Feroz was surprised at first, but then it nodded. It took 2 steps forward and patted its chest, indicating that it would accept the challenge. I can't beat you. I want to fight him. Will immediately shook his head, pointing his tail at the smallest Feroz. Even the smallest Feroz would have a level of at least 30. A Fluffy needed to reach around LV 30 to accumulate enough energy to evolve. As for the chief, Will knew that fighting it would be asking for a beating. One battle would leave him covered in injuries, and his whole day would be wasted. But if he started by challenging the weakest Feroz, he might be able to get in a few more fights. Feroz. The Feroz chief turned to look, a hesitant expression on its face. Feroz, the smaller Feroz said, accepting the challenge without any issue. Seeing this, the chief said no more. It led the herd back a short distance, clearing the field for the battle. Iris took this opportunity to slip into the Feroz herd, hugging a modest-looking Mariup and nuzzling it with all her might. The surrounding Mariup and Fluffy showed no hostility towards her. Firstly, because their nature was gentle, and they wouldn't proactively harm other creatures. Secondly, because Iris looked very weak, and they didn't perceive her as a threat. An Feroz. Will mused, looking at the relatively small opponent before him with a sense of nostalgia. Mega Feroz was quite powerful, but the regular version was rather average in the games. Its main advantage was probably its wide move pool. Without special tutoring, just by leveling up and remembering moves, it could master attacks of 9 different types. Of those, the ones that were super effective against him were Dragon Pulse and Dazzling Gleam. The former needed to be remembered, and the latter could only be learned at a very high level. As long as this Feroz hadn't remembered Dragon Pulse, he wouldn't be under too much pressure. Feroz. The Feroz had originally intended to let Will, the guest, make the first move. But seeing him hesitate, it had no choice but to attack first. A dazzling yellow current of electricity sparked all over its body, and a swift yellow lightning bolt shot towards Will. Thunderbolt, Will thought, raising an eyebrow. He quickly flew higher, dodging the attack. His gaze shifted to the Feroz chief, and he began to feel some pressure. Thunderbolt was not a move an ordinary Feroz could master, it required a teacher. It was obvious that this young Feroz had learned it from the powerful chief. He just didn't know how many other moves it had learned. The battle didn't last long, ending in just 5 minutes. As Will had predicted, this Feroz had likely just evolved, and its level was even lower than his own. Phew! Will felt the paralysis creeping through his body and lay down on the grass, exhausted. The battle hadn't been as easy as he had imagined. While the damage from electric-type moves was reduced, his own moves hadn't been very effective against the Feroz either. Moreover, the Feroz's static ability was troublesome. His contact moves had a chance of paralyzing him, which made him fight timidly. My move pool is too shallow. Although he hadn't gained much experience from this battle, it had made him realize his current problem. The attacking moves he knew were monotonous in type, and he had very few ranged options. Moves like Dragon Tail, Wrap, Slam, and Aqua Tail all required him to make contact with the Feroz. The only moves he could actually use from a distance were the low-damage special attacks, Twister, and Icy Wind. Lan. Seeing the battle was over, Iris quickly ran over, looking at Will with worry. She thought he looked really tired right now. Come to think of it, she had never known why Lan so frequently picked fights with other beasts. She had a feeling that, deep down, he didn't actually like to fight. Will didn't respond and just continued to rest on the ground. The paralysis was still in effect, and he didn't want to move. Feroz. The Feroz chief walked over. What do you want? Iris cried, spreading her arms to block the way in front of Will. She was afraid the Feroz would be dishonorable and attack while he was weak. Feroz. The Feroz chief meant no harm. It took out a red, cherry-like berry and gestured for Iris to feed it to Will. Iris took it. After a moment's hesitation, she took a small bite herself. She waited a minute, and after confirming there were no adverse effects, she placed it in Will's mouth. A cherry berry, Will knew what it was at a glance. In his past life as a Beedrill, he had specifically collected these status-curing berries for emergencies. A cherry berry was what cured paralysis. This berry was relatively common, found in both forests and on the plains. But most Pokémon didn't know about their special effects. The fact that this Feroz chief had so accurately given him a cherry berry meant that it knew its purpose. This guy must be pretty old, Will thought, feeling the paralysis gradually fade. He stood up and looked at the Ampharos chief. Knowledgeable, a deep move pool, and a high level. I would like to learn some skills from you. Is that possible? Will asked tentatively after a moment's hesitation. He didn't know if an Ampharos would teach skills to a Pokémon of another species. But to broaden his move pool, he decided to ask anyway. Pharos? Pharos. The Ampharos chief first tilted its head in confusion, but then it smiled and nodded generously. Thank you, Will said, feeling touched. No wonder the Ampharos line was so popular. Their gentle and generous nature was making even him grow fond of them. He had originally thought about catching one for Liz and Iris, but now he dismissed the idea. A peace-loving Pokémon like this shouldn't be involved in a brutal war. For the next several days, Will and Iris became frequent visitors to the Ampharos herd's territory. They had become friends with them. While Will learned new skills from the Ampharos chief, he could also challenge the stronger Ampharos to gain experience. Iris, meanwhile, was lost in a sea of soft, fluffy Mariup and Fluffy, so happy she forgot all about home. Chapter 48, 4 New Skills. In the blink of an eye, 2 months had passed since Will's first encounter with the Ampharos herd. During this time, he hadn't stayed with them exclusively. In addition to his daily training with the Ampharos chief, Will would also ask him about other powerful Pokémon herds nearby, then go and pay them a visit to say hello and issue a challenge. In 2 months, Will had made contact with 6 different Pokémon herds. The first was a Persian herd to the north. It wasn't large, with only 3 Persian and 10 Meowth. The initial attitude of these cats towards Will was quite poor. The Alpha Persian was around LV40 and had even toyed with him during their first meeting. Will was no hothead, he chose to run back to the Ampharos herd for reinforcements and gave the Persian a proper round of shock therapy. Since then, the Persian herd has been very respectful towards him, sparring with him whenever he asks without a word of complaint. The second was a Tauros herd. It was a considerable size, with a full 30 members. A remarkable thing about the Tauros herd was that their average level was very high, almost all 30 were between LV25 and LV35. Only the Alpha, a battle-scarred adult, was a higher level, comparable to the Alpha Persian. The Tauros herd was quite welcoming of Will's arrival, but it was a welcome full of fighting spirit, not friendship. Tauros are energetic, hot-tempered, and brutish Pokémon who like to confirm their strength through battle. They were extremely enthusiastic about Will's challenges, practically fighting each other for the chance to spar with him. Will spent the most time challenging the Tauros herd, taking nearly half a month to fight through all of them. From these frequent head-on clashes, he unexpectedly learned the move takedown. The third and fourth herds were both Multank herds. The difference was that the former was a domesticated herd raised by the Dragonite Kingdom, while the latter was wild. Will had no interest in the former, it was a huge herd, but their average level was only 20. The wild Multank herd, however, was very strong. Although there were only about 10 of them, the lowest level Multank was LV35. This herd was very gentle, with an attitude similar to the Ampharos herds. Will would occasionally take Iris there to get some high-quality Moo milk. The fifth was a Rapidash herd. This herd wasn't large, but their strength was comparable to the Ampharos herd, with 5 Rapidash and 10 Ponyta. A Ponyta generally needs to reach around LV40 to evolve, so the number of Rapidash in this herd was a testament to their power. Will only greeted the Rapidash herd from a distance and didn't interact much. They were not particularly welcoming of his presence. While not hostile, they had no intention of befriending him. The sixth was a Golduck herd near a large lake. The Golduck were the rulers of that lake, and their alpha was at least LV50. The herd wasn't huge, but it consisted mostly of high-level Golduck, with very few Seduck. Will got along quite well with this group. After the Ampharos and Tauros, he visited them the most frequently. Now, 2 months had passed, and Will's personal status screen had changed. Dragonair. Potential, Purple. Level, 35. Type, Dragon. Ability, Shed Skin. Height, 9 m. Weight, 40 kilograms. Moves, Focus Energy, Inherited, Wrap, Leer, Twister, Thunder Wave, Dragon Tail, Agility, Slam, Icy Wind, Aqua Tail, Thunderbolt, Takedown, Water Pulse, Thunder. His level hadn't increased much, only by 2. There were 2 reasons for this. First, the experience required to level up had increased dramatically. He might now have to fight dozens of evenly matched battles to gain a single level. Second, he had focused most of his energy on learning new moves from the Ampharos and Golduck chiefs. This was evident from his skill list. Compared to before, he now had 4 new moves. The value of Thunderbolt and Water Pulse needs no explanation. The former was the signature move of Ash's Pikachu, a powerful attack with a chance to paralyze and a very high accuracy rate. The latter could confuse the target and was also highly accurate. The move Takedown, which he learned by accident, was a bit of a chicken rib for Will, useless to keep, a waste to throw away. It was a normal type physical move with mediocre accuracy that also caused recoil damage. Even if he needed a physical move, he wouldn't choose Takedown. Both Dragon Tail and Aqua Tail offered a better return. Finally, the move worth mentioning specifically was Thunder. As an ultimate electric type move, it traded a little accuracy for much higher power. Will had learned the first 3 moves in just 1 month, but he had spent an entire month learning Thunder. As for the accuracy issue, different trainers had different ways to compensate. For Will, who was both the trainer and the Pokémon, accuracy wasn't really a problem. He would never unleash a move like Thunder, which had high energy consumption and a long recovery time, without a 100% chance of hitting. The solution he had devised was to make good use of the move Wrap. First, he would bind the target with his body. Only then would he consider using Thunder. Another evening arrived. Will painstakingly rescued an innocent Meowth from Iris's smothering affection and then took the reluctant little girl back to the palace. The first thing he did upon returning was to find Liz in her study. He felt that he was due for a molt today. After evolving into a Dragonair, his molting frequency was about once a month. He had already molted twice before, with both Liz and Iris helping him. His body was so long now that it was a lot of work for Liz alone, so he had started roping Iris in to help. "Lan, Iris, you're back. I have something to tell you," said Liz, who was feeding her Magikarp in the study. She turned and smiled as the two burst in. "What is it?" Will asked, moving closer to look at the Magikarp. After more than 2 months together, the bond between the two girls and their Magikarp was already quite good. He felt it was about time to take them out to level up and prepare for their evolution into Gyarados. "The day after tomorrow, I have some business to attend to in Jubilance Town. Do you want to come with me?" Although she was asking both of them, Liz's gaze was fixed on Iris. She knew that Lan would definitely go with her, there was no need to even ask. Jubilance Town? Perfect, Will's mind raced, recalling the name. He remembered that it was a coastal city in the southernmost part of the Dragonite Kingdom. Jubilance Town is right by the sea, he thought, his gaze shifting to the Magikarp. "I want to go!" Iris exclaimed, her face full of longing and anticipation. Of course, she wanted to go to Jubilance Town with Lan and her aunt. For her, this was basically a vacation, and she certainly wasn't going to miss it. Chapter 49, Taking the Queen for a Stroll. On the morning of the 3rd day, Will and Liz set off for Jubilance Town with a large entourage. The 2 Magikarp were brought along as well. Iris, however, could only watch them leave with teary eyes, held firmly in place by her mother's iron grip. Will was also helpless in this matter. He had originally wanted to bring Iris along. After all, on this trip to Jubilance Town, there was a high probability that the 2 high-level Magikarp would evolve into Gyarados. What would it look like if their trainer, Iris, wasn't present for such a moment? When she finally saw the Gyarados, with its completely changed appearance and personality, would she be so scared that she'd faint on the spot? But there was nothing to be done. Iris's mother would not allow her to leave the capital. It was understandable. This was the era of primal beasts, and a time of continuous conflict between the Dragonite Kingdom and the Kingdom of the Land. A major war could break out at any moment, the risks were great. Naturally, Iris's mother was not comfortable letting her precious daughter travel too far from her side. The road to Jubilance Town was long. The distance between 2 towns in reality was completely different from how it was portrayed in the anime, where you could arrive after just a few days of walking. Because of his size, Will couldn't fit into a normal carriage. And since this was a sudden plan, there was no time to prepare a larger carriage that could accommodate him. Will himself didn't mind. He was a Pokémon, after all, his stamina was far greater than that of ordinary horses. By the time the horses needed to rest, he would probably have only just broken a sweat. But Liz didn't think that way. She stubbornly insisted on staying with Will. so, a helpless Hestia had to quickly find a large, flatbed wagon used for transporting supplies and have it urgently modified. The end result was a strange vehicle. It resembled a large tricycle from the human world, only its power source was 3 horses instead of a motor. In a low-lying area. "Liz, how much longer until we get there?" Will asked, letting out a bored yawn as he lay on the soft, flat platform. He looked at Liz, who was leaning against him and reading a book. "Don't be anxious, Lan. It'll be quick. We'll probably be there in just a week," Liz replied, having roughly understood his meaning. She, for one, was cherishing this leisurely time. Her days in the capital were tedious and busy, she had long grown tired of handling official duties from morning to night. She even occasionally thought about just handing her position over to someone else. On top of that, watching Will and Iris go out to play together every day made her incredibly envious. She would sometimes even worry that the bond between the 2 little ones would eventually surpass the bond she had with him. Now, she had a legitimate excuse to slack off, and she had Will by her side. She was very happy. A week. Good heavens, I'm going to be bored to death. Will's eyes widened, and his body went even more limp. He hadn't expected this. In the anime, the distance between 2 towns always seemed so short. Ash and his friends would arrive after just a few days on foot. But reality was not like that at all. It had already been 3 days since they had left the capital, yet Liz was telling him they still had another week to go. And this was by carriage, not on foot. It was a difference not just in speed, but in endurance. To take 10 days to get from the capital to Jubilance Town, the gap between the anime and reality was just too great. Based on his memory of the Johto map, the Dragonite Kingdom's capital was located in the middle right of the region, near the future Violet City, but on the plains further east, closer to the MT Silver Range. Jubilance Town was on the coast directly south of the capital, a place that would one day become Cherry Grove City. Am I really going to just sleep this whole week away? With this thought, Will closed his eyes and dozed off for a while. But that short nap somehow lasted until evening. Will opened his eyes when he felt the carriage stop. They were now in a forest, not a mountain forest, but one on the plains. This was the type of forest that appeared more often in the anime, with trees that were not very tall, only about 3 or 4 meters. The biggest difference between this forest and the one on MT Silver was that it was not as dangerous. The forest on MT Silver was fraught with peril. The Pokémon there were ferocious, and the competition between them was fierce. After all, it was a limited space with a high density of Pokémon. But this forest was the opposite. Although it was large, the number of Pokémon was small. The density was at least 10 times lower than in the MT Silver Forest. And the inhabitants were mostly herbivorous Pokémon with weak aggressive and territorial instincts. This was why the caravan had chosen to stop here. At this moment, the team was setting up camp. People were gathering firewood, while the beast callers and their Pokémon patrolled the perimeter. After several days of boredom, Will couldn't stand lying around any longer. He wasn't a dopey Magikarp that could stare blankly for days without feeling bored. I'll ask Liz to go for a walk, he thought, getting up from the wagon and looking at her. Do you want to go for a walk with me, Lan? Liz understood him at once. One could only say that the rapport and bond between a trainer and their Pokémon was truly a mysterious thing. From not understanding his actions at all, Liz could now, with just a single glance, instantly perceive his intentions as if they were psychically linked. Yes, let's go. Okay. Liz stood up and spoke to a nearby guard. The guard immediately prepared to summon some beast callers to protect her, but she refused. After Liz promised she wouldn't go far and would make a loud noise at the first sign of danger, the guards reluctantly agreed to let her go for a walk alone with Will. This was mainly because they were familiar with this road and had passed through this forest several times. If this had been the forest on MT Silver, they would not have let her go, even if she had argued until she was blue in the face. Even a direct order from the Queen wouldn't have worked. In the Dragonite Kingdom, the Queen's personal safety always superseded the Queen's commands. Hee, let's go. Seeing Liz return, Will immediately coiled his tail around her and dashed into the dark forest. He moved so quickly that many of the guards didn't even have time to react. Anyone who didn't know better might have thought he was eloping with the Queen. 5 minutes later, Will and Liz were in a spot where the patrol members were completely out of sight. Under a certain tree, they leaned against the trunk, quietly enjoying the tranquility of the forest at night. The forests of the Pokémon world were different from those on Earth. In this world, Fireflies were everywhere, especially in the woods. Will swept his tail through a nearby bush, and a large cloud of them flew out. The moonlight shone through the canopy, and these small insects did their best to emit their own unique light. The interweaving of faint yellow and pale white light illuminated the once dim forest, giving it a hazy glow. The nearby treetops would rustle from time to time. There were probably little creatures hiding behind the leaves, curiously peeking at the goings-on outside. The sound of flapping wings came from above. Looking up, he saw a cheerful little hoot-hoot perched on a branch. And from further away, a wondrous song would occasionally drift over. It was likely a newborn Iglybuff, practicing its fledgling song. "It's so beautiful," Liz said, tilting her head to rest on Will's tail, which was draped over her shoulder. Together, they quietly admired the beautiful scenery of a forest night, a sight unique to the Pokémon world. Chapter 50, The Pokémon with Burning Flames. As someone from Earth who had once longed for this world, Will's mind couldn't help but drift into a trance as he found himself truly living in the scene of his dreams. "Lan, look, a guard is coming over. They were probably attracted by the noise we made." Liz's voice snapped Will back to his senses. He looked around and saw a flicker of firelight. Will's senses immediately sharpened, and he narrowed his eyes in that direction. Most Pokémon have much better night vision than humans, so he could roughly make out the location of the light. "That's no person. Did we wander into another Pokémon's territory?" Will stood up, coiling his tail around Liz, ready to run at a moment's notice. It was his first time in this forest. He was in unfamiliar territory and didn't know the strength of the local Pokémon. With the fire type suddenly appearing, he had to be vigilant. Moreover, fire-type Pokémon that live in forests are relatively few in number, especially those with flames constantly burning on their bodies. In a normal state, the flames on their bodies are more like decorations. But once they get excited, the temperature of those flames can instantly spike, becoming real fire that can ignite other things. "Lan? Is that a beast?" Liz sensed from Will's posture that something was wrong. Looking again, she noticed the flame was rather low to the ground, like a human infant holding a torch. "Yes, it is," Will nodded. As the flame drew closer, he could gradually make out the Pokémon's silhouette. "Oh my god, are you serious? Am I really this lucky?" Because he recognized the silhouette, Will decisively uncoiled his tail from Liz and did his best to lower his body, reducing the sense of threat and pressure he projected. He was worried he might scare the little one away. Char! The owner of the flame appeared. It was a cute, dopey-looking Charmander. "Ooh! A little red lizard." Liz peeked out from behind Will and saw the Charmander's true form. "This one is a dragon," Will said, sizing up the Charmander, whose eyes were filled with pure innocence. Its height of only 0.6 meters indicated that the little one was either newly hatched or simply malnourished, which was why it was only at the standard Pokédex height. But judging by the flame on the tip of its tail, its life force was quite vigorous. As a Kanto region starter, the fame of the Charmander line far surpassed that of even Gyarados or many pseudo-legendaries. And Charmander's final evolution, Charizard, had earned the venerable title of Nintendo's favorite son and Junichi Masuda's darling. Such a title was not earned for a single reason. Whether in the games, the anime, or even in real-world fan communities, Charizard's popularity was immense. It was because of this popularity that Masuda had, generation after generation, shown Charizard blatant favoritism. With each new version, Charizard would always get a boost. You would never find it at the bottom of the tier lists. 2 different Mega Evolutions, never mind ordinary Pokémon, even many legendary Pokémon didn't get that kind of treatment. The most outrageous was in the 8th generation. When it was explicitly announced that the Pokédex would be cut and hundreds of Pokémon, including many previous starters, would not be available in the Galar region, Charizard was different. In a generation where Mega Evolution and Z-moves were removed and former meta powerhouses like Mawile fell from grace, Charizard not only made it to Galar but even received its own Gigantamax form, preserving its place on the competitive battlefield. So, to encounter a Charmander here made Will feel incredibly lucky, to the point where he was worried his great size would scare it away. Char! The Charmander's first reaction upon seeing Will and Liz was not to run, but to rush forward and wave enthusiastically in greeting. Will and Liz were both stunned. Different environments really do raise different Pokémon, Will thought with a sigh. From the moment he and Liz had sat down under the tree, he had noticed that the Pokémon in this forest were completely different from those on MT Silver. The Pokémon on MT Silver lived in the true era of primal beasts, following the law of the jungle. But the Pokémon in this forest seemed to have entered the era of leagues ahead of time, they were all as innocent as children. Comparing the two, and then thinking about the Pokémon on the plains, they seemed to fall somewhere in between. This little one is quite cute, Liz said with a smile, seeing the Charmander's actions. If it had been Iris, she would have undoubtedly rushed forward and hugged the Charmander without a second thought. But Liz was a mature adult, a heroic queen who had led the Dragonite tribe to conquer countless other tribes. She wouldn't just hug a strange beast because it was cute, especially with the flame constantly burning on its tail. In the eyes of humans of this era, that was a supernatural power, which meant this beast had the ability to kill them. The reason Liz had chosen Will in the first place was because of the feeling she got from her heart, not because he was cute. Yang? Where are your parents? Will asked, inching a little closer. If this Charmander was living in the forest all by itself, then he wouldn't be polite. In his original plan for Liz's team, he had not included Charizard as a target. It wasn't that he looked down on it, it was that he didn't dare to hope for it. Starter Pokémon were not common even in the era of leagues, let alone this era. He had never expected to meet one, and even if he did, he thought it would be one of the Johto starters, not a Kanto one. But now that he had been so fortunate, he was not about to let this little one get away. Among the Pokémon of the Kanto and Johto regions, Charizard was T0 tier, not only strong but also highly mobile. And while it wasn't a pseudo-legendary or a legendary, its design was just as cool. I've never seen them, the Charmander said, a little sadly. But it quickly shook off the feeling and walked forward to get a better look at Will and Liz. As I thought, Will wasn't surprised at all. He could tell from the little one's physical development. If this Charmander had parents, it would absolutely not be so small and pitiful looking. Only by surviving alone in the forest would it end up in such a sorry state. Char, you're so big, the Charmander said, having finished its inspection of Will. It gestured with its small hands, its eyes full of shock. Lan, what's this little one doing? Liz asked, looking at the Charmander by her leg, a little confused. She felt that this beast was a bit different from the others, seeming a bit simple-minded. You'll be very big one day too, Will said, ignoring Liz. This was a critical moment. Char? Really? Of course. But you have to become our underling to get as big as me. Chapter 51, The Capture of the Charmander Who Wished to Fly. Char? Underling, the Charmander asked, tilting its head in confusion. Having been born not long ago and living all by itself, it didn't quite understand such a concept. Its mind was still in a hazy, blurry state, slowly accepting and recognizing the world. Yes. It means you have to listen to me and her from now on, Will nodded, then nudged the nearby Liz with his head to indicate who her was. Char? Can you fly? The Charmander considered this for a moment, then asked an unexpected question. I can, Will replied truthfully, though he didn't know why the Charmander was asking. At the same time, he controlled his body and floated into the air to prove he wasn't lying. Char. That's amazing. If I listen to you, can I fly in the future? The Charmander's eyes instantly lit up. Of course, Will grinned and nodded. He didn't feel like he was tricking the little one. Although Charmander's final evolution, Charizard, would grow wings and be able to fly, alone, scrawny Charmander had no guarantee of surviving in this forest long enough to evolve. There was also another problem. Many of the Pokémon that lived in the forest did not welcome fire types, especially one like Charmander, which had a flame constantly burning on its tail. If its emotions got the better of it and the flame became real, it could start a forest fire and cause a disaster. In the future era of leagues, that might not be a death sentence, but in this era of primal beasts, the other Pokémon would absolutely not let it off the hook. Therefore, the only way for this Charmander to grow up safely into a Charizard with the ability to fly was to follow Will and Liz and accept their protection. Char. Then I'll listen to you. Hearing this, the Charmander nodded vigorously. It then ran over, wagging its little tail, and hugged Will's body, as if afraid he might go back on his word. He. Charmander, get! Will couldn't help but chuckle, excitedly poking the clueless Liz with his tail. Lan, what is this child doing hugging you? Liz couldn't understand what the Pokémon were saying, but she could see that Will was happy. Char. Hearing Liz speak, the Charmander switched targets, moving over to hug her leg. At its current age and level of experience, it couldn't understand her words, but like an animal, it could roughly guess the meaning from her tone. Hey, hey! Liz was startled by the Charmander's actions. She quickly shook her leg, trying to get free from its little claws, and looked to Will for help. But one look at him and she calmed down. Seeing Will's smiling face, she knew that the child hugging her leg probably wouldn't hurt her. Otherwise, he would never have let it get so close. Liz, you should pet him, Will said, tilting his chin to gesture for Liz to interact with the Charmander. Ooh, he's so warm. The complete opposite of you, Lan. Liz seemed to understand his meaning and cautiously placed her hand on the Charmander's head. In that instant, she felt as if she had touched a still warm piece of cake, a pleasant warmth spreading through her palm, like holding her hand up to the summer sun. Will, on the other hand, both as a Dragonite and a Dragonair, had a naturally low body temperature, cool like autumn rain. Every night, Liz had to thoroughly rub him to raise his body temperature before she would snuggle up and hold him. This situation would only be reversed when he evolved into a Dragonite. Char the Charmander wagged its tail contentedly as its head was being petted. It was the first time it had ever been petted. It felt quite nice. The weather is getting colder. We should head back, Will said, glancing towards the depths of the forest. He figured that the nocturnal Pokémon in this forest should be waking up soon. Will used his tail to place Liz on his back, allowing her to hold onto his head or neck. He then coiled his tail around the Charmander. With a powerful push, he took off, flying high above the forest to look for the firelight of their camp. Char char! Char char! Finding himself suddenly in the air, the Charmander wasn't scared at all. Instead, it excitedly flapped its little arms, as if it were truly flying by itself. Its round eyes were filled with excitement. Pfft! Liz, in front, looked back and couldn't help but cover her mouth and giggle. She found this little creature quite amusing. Lan, are we taking this child back with us? Like the Magikarp. Liz reached out and gently stroked the small feathery wings on the side of Will's head. By now, she had understood his intentions. Yes, Will nodded. This Charmander had to be brought back, and it had to be specially trained. In the future, when Will was out leveling or catching Pokémon, it would become Liz's most capable general, protecting her in his stead. Although Liz hadn't seemed to be in any danger in the months since he had arrived, one could never be too certain. They weren't even at war yet, just experiencing some minor friction. Once the war began, who knew what kind of assassins the Kingdom of the Land might send? Ordinary Pokémon might have trouble breaking through the capital's heavy defenses. But what if it was a psychic type that could teleport, a ghost type that could turn invisible and phase through walls, or a ground type that could dig and camouflage itself? Therefore, the more personal guards Liz had by her side, the better. Even with the Magikarp and this Charmander, Will still didn't feel completely at ease. It would be best to add another 8 or 10 Pokémon to her team. At the camp. Lady Liz and Lord Lan are back. The people in the camp were the first to spot Liz and Will in the sky. At the same time, a question arose in their minds. They didn't remember Lady Liz leaving with a torch. When Will landed, the group of guards and the Charmander stared at each other, momentarily stunned. Char! The Charmander was the first to react. It was startled and quickly hid behind the massive Will. When it came to feeling safe, the giant Dragonair was the best. Lady Liz, why have you brought back another beast? You already have 2 by your side, a beast scholar who was traveling with the group complained with a pained expression. Before they left, Hestia had specifically told him to keep an eye on Liz and make sure the queen didn't get into any more trouble. And now, not only had she brought back another beast, but it was one they had never seen or knew anything about. Although it wasn't large, the flame on its tail indicated it was no ordinary beast. Who knew what it might evolve into? I caught him! Will declared, stepping forward. But the scholar couldn't understand him and just looked at Liz with a troubled expression. I feel, this child has great potential. If we raise it, it will surely become a powerful asset for the Dragonite Kingdom, Liz said, coming up with an excuse after a moment's thought. She unconditionally trusted Will's choices. This isn't a matter of potential, but a matter of whether its personality has flaws, whether it might go berserk and harm you in the future. There are many cases of a master being harmed by their own beast every year. You cannot guarantee that it will always be obedient and well-behaved. Humph, Will scoffed, turning his head away in disdain. Those masters who were harmed by their own Pokémon knew best why it happened. They must have done something shameful, something they wouldn't dare to speak of. Chapter 52, Blaze, the little troublemaker. Lan will protect me, Liz said, turning to smile as she stroked Will's back. At the same time, she leaned down and tapped the Charmander's head with her finger. She didn't pay much mind to the beast scholar's words, because what she thought was exactly what she had said. Moreover, she felt that she, and everyone else in this world, seemed to have some misunderstanding about these beasts. Your Majesty, Lord Lan is also a beast. No one can guarantee that he. Do not let me hear anyone call Lan a beast again. Liz turned her head to look at the beast scholar. She was still smiling, but there was no emotion in her voice. This is the first time I have ever disliked the term beast so much. Will stared blankly at Liz, quietly swallowing. It was the first time he had ever seen such a terrifying side of her. And he could clearly sense her anger. Even though the remarks were directed at him, Liz was even angrier than he was. Yes, Your Majesty, the beast scholar said, seemingly frightened. He quickly lowered his head. The onlookers who had gathered around also quickly dispersed, pretending to be busy as if nothing had happened. You don't need to worry so much about Lan. I know him better than you do, Liz said with a wave of her hand, dismissing the scholar. Yes, the scholar sighed and turned to leave. He understood now. Not even Hestia, or Liz's own deceased parents if they were here, could change her mind. He could only hope that her trust in Will would not be betrayed. Come on, Lan, let's go eat. I'll barbecue some meat for you myself. Liz turned and left with Will and the Charmander. You know how to barbecue. I'm amazing at it. You'll see in a bit. All right, I'll be waiting. Half an hour later. Char char. After taking a bite of the grilled meat, the Charmander excitedly stomped its little legs, hopping on the spot just like Ash's Totodile. This is actually pretty good. I never knew you had this skill, Will said, also surprised after tasting it. To say it was the most delicious thing in the world would be an exaggeration, but the quality was certainly high. She could easily open a popular barbecue restaurant with this skill back on Earth. It's good, right? Hee hee. Liz couldn't help but chuckle as she watched the two little ones eat so happily. Then, she suddenly remembered something. She took a piece of the cooked meat, rinsed it with water, and then cut it into small pieces. The next scene was a gratifying one for Will. Liz had actually remembered the two neglected Magikarp, and she tossed all the small pieces of meat into their fish tank. Liz is really starting to look like a trainer, Will thought, nodding from the side. Liz's Magikarp, Carp, ate happily. But Iris's Magikarp seemed a little depressed, clearly sad that its trainer wasn't around. After a full meal came time for sleep. The concept of time in this era was not very strong. Especially while on the march, people judged the time by observing the color of the sky and the change in temperature. It was currently late winter, so the sun set early in the evening, and the temperature was always low. This made everyone go to sleep earlier than usual. Inside Liz's large tent. With Blaze here, the tent is much warmer, Liz said as she personally made the bed, glancing at the Charmander who was sitting on the ground, nodding off. Blaze was the name Liz had given the Charmander. Be careful he doesn't set the tent on fire, Will said, keeping a close eye on the Charmander. Although he knew a fair bit about most Pokémon, this was his first time in close contact with a real Charmander. His knowledge of the flame on its tail wasn't much better than Liz's. So, he had to constantly watch it. Who knew if the Charmander might have a nightmare, get emotional, and the flame would become real. That would be a huge problem. It's ready. Lan, Blaze, come to bed, Liz called to the two Pokémon. The Magikarp was already fast asleep in its tank nearby. But when Liz looked at the flame on the Charmander's tail, she hesitated. In her view, if she let it get under the covers, it might set the blankets on fire. It's better to let this little guy sleep on his own, Will said, pulling a small piece of the blanket off and laying it in front of the Charmander. Since he wasn't sure if its tail would ignite the bedding either, it was best to have it sleep a little further away from them. The Charmander was still very young and didn't seem to have very good control over its own power. A little extra caution couldn't hurt. The Charmander was already exhausted. It immediately pounced onto the small blanket, hugged its own tail, and fell fast asleep. Let's go to sleep too. The next morning, the caravan set off again on the road to Jubilance Town. This time, with the cheerful and lively Charmander joining them, the journey had a bit more of a festive atmosphere. Blaze would constantly cling to Will, asking him to take him for a flight in the sky. Every time, the Charmander was overjoyed, its desire to fly growing stronger and stronger, and the look in its eyes as it gazed at Will was full of admiration. But the little thing was also a bit reckless. Sometimes, while standing on Will's back, it would suddenly flap its little hands and leap off. The first time it happened, Will was so scared he almost fainted. Fortunately, he knew agility and managed to catch the Charmander in a dive. Otherwise, the little one would have been a goner. Will's initial assessment was correct. Without him and Liz looking after it, this Charmander would have been almost certain to die, either by its own hand or by being eaten, long before it ever became a Charizard. This is perfect. I'll have Liz command this little guy to train along the way. That way, we won't be wasting time. Will quickly thought of a great plan that would kill 3 birds with 1 stone. He decided that during their rest breaks, he would guide Liz to command Blaze to battle weak wild Pokémon. This would teach Liz how to command a Pokémon in battle, let Blaze gain experience and level up, and also provide an outlet for its boundless energy, making it a little more settled on the road. No sooner said than done. Soon, it was time for their noon rest break. The army stopped in its tracks. There was no need to set up a full camp, they just prepared to light fires and cook. After eating, they would have a short afternoon nap, so the break was quite long. Will and Liz didn't need to nap. During the journey, they could sleep whenever they wanted. This free time was actually very precious. Will seized this opportunity, coiled his tail around Liz and Blaze, and flew off to find a weak Pokémon. Chapter 53, Dodge It. On the wild plains. Charmander, use Ember on Execute. The one who spoke was not Liz, but Will. In front of him, Blaze the Charmander was in a standoff with a wild Execute. Execute is a grass/psychic type Pokémon, making it weak to the fire type Charmander. It is composed of 6 egg-like individuals. Each individual has its own thoughts and expressions, but for the most part, their thoughts are unified. These individuals can be separated, but they feel uneasy when apart, lose their balance, and use their strong telepathic bond to quickly regroup. Although they are called Execute, this is actually a misunderstanding from ancient times. While they look like eggs, their physiology is closer to that of plants. In the fields of biology and genetics, Execute is more often considered to be a Pokémon similar to a plant seed. Char char. Hearing Will's words, Blaze spat out a stream of embers from his mouth, which ignited the patch of grass where the Execute were. Execute. The Execute quickly rolled away as the blue light of psychic power glowed from their many eyes. Char. Seeing this light, Blaze's eyes began to swim. His eyelids grew heavy, and he finally collapsed to the ground, fast asleep. The Execute, meanwhile, quickly rolled into the tall grass and escaped. Hypnosis, hey! Will quietly watched the Execute leave, then lifted his tail. Aqua Tail. His tail, wrapped in water-type energy, swept across the small patch of burning grass, extinguishing the flames in an instant. Neither Charmander nor Execute have high levels. Charmander is probably only LV5, Will thought, looking at the sleeping Blaze. He nudged him with his tail. He had tested him earlier, the only moves Blaze knew were Scratch, Growl, and Ember. He hadn't even learned Smokescreen, which he should get around LV8. This was the state of a starter Pokémon just taken from a professor's lab. Char. Blaze scratched his rear and continued to sleep. Smack. Will smacked the little one on the head. Char. Only then did the Charmander rub his eyes and get back up, looking around with a dopey expression, as if he couldn't remember what had just happened. Liz, it's your turn to command him in battle, Will said, ignoring Blaze and turning to the Queen. His goal in the previous duel wasn't for Blaze to win, but simply to let Liz watch the process of him commanding a Pokémon, so she would understand what he wanted her to do. Liz, who had been watching quietly from the side, tilted her head in confusion when Will suddenly looked at her. Will lifted his head and thought for a moment. His eyes lit up. He flew off and grabbed a bewildered-looking Centaurette. It was a normal-type Sentry Pokémon. If he had a choice, he wouldn't have brought a Centaurette here. In the wild, a Centaurette was not a competent solo fighter. This wasn't a matter of strength, it was just unqualified. Centaurette have a very neurotic personality and are extremely wary. If they get separated from their colony, they become too scared to sleep. Without a partner by their side, they can't even muster the courage to fight. If they have a trainer, it's a different story. They will view their trainer as a partner and become brave. But a wild centaurette on its own is quite helpless. When faced with a strange environment and an enemy, a lone centaurette will only do one thing. Sen. The centaurette stood up on its thick, large tail, making its body appear larger than usual in an attempt to intimidate them. In reality, the little guy was so scared it was about to cry. Will sighed helplessly. The problem was that, aside from the Execute, this centaurette was the only other Pokémon nearby that was a suitable opponent for Blaze. And with his current move pool, Blaze was no match for an Execute that knew Hypnosis. Char. Blaze, however, was full of spirit. Seeing a new opponent, he hopped in front of the centaurette and let out a threatening cry. Are they going to fight again? Liz asked, watching the scene with her bright, wine-red eyes. But to her surprise, Will used his tail to wrap around her and place her about 5 meters behind the Charmander. Liz was stunned for a moment, but she immediately understood his intention. Recalling the positions he and Blaze had taken against the Execute, she knew that Will wanted her to command the battle. Blaze, go and defeat it. Liz commanded calmly. She was no delicate flower raised in a greenhouse. Let's not forget, at the tender age of 8, she had personally led a team into the perilous MT Silver to bring out the Beedrill swarm. She had personally led that swarm and her army to defeat and conquer one tribe after another. In a way, she was the very first beast caller of the Dragonite Kingdom. It was only after becoming queen 10 years ago that she had stopped commanding beasts in battle. Char. Hearing Liz's words, Blaze charged forward, tail wagging. However, because Liz hadn't given a specific move command, he decided on his own to use Scratch. Not bad, she has the makings of a trainer, Will thought, nodding as he watched. He had thought that training Liz would be a long road, but it seemed that wasn't the case. The only trouble was that humans of this era had a very limited understanding of Pokémon names, moves, and types. They didn't understand that Pokémon could master a variety of moves, nor had they named those moves yet, so they couldn't give specific commands. Sen. The centaurette was startled as Blaze charged at it. It subconsciously dropped its tail, closed its eyes, and blindly rammed forward, a white light trailing behind it. Blaze, dodge it, quick! Liz immediately changed her tactics. Char. Blaze dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the centaurette's quick attack. His tail got clipped, but it was nothing serious. The centaurette's battle sense was too poor. It had closed its eyes out of fear and nervousness while using quick attack, causing it to misjudge its direction, allowing Blaze to easily dodge. So this god-tier move appeared this early, Will thought, a little surprised. Burn him with fire. Liz commanded again. Char. Blaze immediately opened his mouth and used Ember. Sen. The embers hit, injuring the poor centaurette. Sen, I'm gonna die. The fur on the little creature's body was slightly singed. It couldn't take it anymore. It sat down on the ground and began to wail helplessly. Oh dear! I'd better take this little one back, Will said. Seeing the centaurette crying so pitifully, he quickly wrapped it in his tail and returned it to its colony. By the time he got back, Liz was already stroking Blaze's head and praising him. You were amazing, Blaze. Chapter 54, Let's go for a dip. After returning, Will was lost in thought. Liz had good instincts as a trainer. She didn't just mindlessly order her Pokémon to attack, she knew to have it evade damage from its opponent. But how to solve the problem of move names? Earlier, when Liz had said burn it with fire, Blaze knew to use Ember. That was because it was the only fire-breathing move he knew. If he also knew moves like Flamethrower or Fire Spin, then a generic command like that might have caused him to hesitate, losing the rhythm of the battle as he tried to decide which move to use. How does the army solve this problem? Will wondered. In the Beast Caller army, when a trainer shouted breathe fire or discharge, which move would their Pokémon choose to use? Did they decide on their own? Forget it, this is too much trouble. Let's just leave it. The problem of naming moves can be left to the humans of the future, Will decided after a moment, giving up on finding a solution. Besides, Liz was the queen. Even if she went to the battlefield, she would not be the one personally commanding the Pokémon. All Carp and Blaze needed to do was protect her. Right now, having her command Blaze in battle was more about deepening their bond. Let's go a little further out and see if we can find another suitable target, Will said, and led them a bit further away. During the noon rest break, Liz and Blaze only had 2 battles, 1 win and 1 loss. They lost the second battle because Blaze, after fighting consecutively, was out of stamina. His level was too low, and he had no battle experience. He put his full power into every move, whether it hit or not. By the second battle, he had no strength left, and his scratch was so feeble that he was defeated. It's okay, Blaze. We'll try again next time. As the caravan started moving again, Liz encouraged the dejected Charmander with a clenched fist. Yes, comforting a Pokémon after a defeat is also very important, Will nodded, watching the scene. With her gentle personality towards Pokémon, Liz was a natural-born trainer. Gentle people often find it easier to gain a Pokémon's affection and trust, which is a great advantage. The days passed one by one. One morning, Will's still hazy eyes suddenly snapped open. In that instant, they became crystal clear. I smell it, damp air. This must be the scent of the sea. Will quickly left the covers, rushed out of the tent, and lifted his head to look south. Does the sea have a smell? Yes. In his past life as a human, Will had been to many beaches. Some seas had no smell. Some smelled foul. But since becoming a Pokémon, he had never even seen the ocean of this world, let alone smelled it. Now, a scent filled his nostrils. It was a refreshing smell, so clean that it felt like all the pores on his body had opened at once. Lan. Char. Liz and Blaze were woken by the commotion and came out of the tent, rubbing their eyes. We're almost there. Jubilance Town, Will said, turning to Liz. Looks like we are, Liz said, also feeling the sea breeze now, which woke her up. Lady Liz, we should arrive at Jubilance Town around noon, a guard reported, walking over when he saw she was awake. I can't wait. Liz, we're going now, Will said, shaking his body. He stretched his muscles, then coiled his tail around Liz and Blaze and flew off in the direction the sea breeze was coming from. He had been cooped up for 10 days, traveling through nothing but grasslands, lowlands, and forests. This was truly the Johto region, with such terrain everywhere. The neighboring Kanto region was probably much the same. Char char. Once again in the air, Blaze immediately went from sleepy to excited. The air here is so humid. It's a little uncomfortable, Liz said, rubbing her skin, trying to dry it. Have Blaze breathe some fire to dry the air. Char char. The words were barely out of his mouth when Blaze lifted his head and used ember on the sky. Ah! Blaze, what are you doing? Liz cried out, startled. Char. Blaze tilted his head. Didn't he tell me to breathe fire? Haha, Will couldn't help but laugh at the scene. Of course, the main reason for his good mood was the excitement of nearly reaching their destination. A journey that would take the carriage 3 or 4 hours would only take Will half an hour. But this speed was traded for comfort. Riding in a carriage for a few hours might give Liz a sore bottom. But being carried by Will at high speed for half an hour was mentally and physically exhausting, leaving her with an aching back. Fortunately, all the physical pain and mental fatigue were washed away, purified, the moment the endless, azure sea appeared before their eyes. The ocean of the Pokémon world. Will stared at the sea below, immediately adjusted his direction, and dove towards its surface. Liz, having seen the ocean before, was not as curious. Ah, I can see Jubilance Town, her gaze was fixed on the coastal town. At this stage, Jubilance Town was a small to medium-sized town with a permanent population of only a few thousand. It was once the territory of the Jubila tribe, but it was now part of the Dragonite Kingdom. Its specialties were the sea breeze and the fragrance of flowers. The old folks strolling on the country roads below noticed the giant beast in the sky. They all looked up, their expressions filled with amazement. For the people of Jubilance Town, it was their first time seeing a Dragonair. They had only heard from traveling merchants from the capital that the queen has a beast, and it's especially beautiful after it evolved, so they couldn't recognize him. Wait, Lan, what are you doing? Liz was just about to raise her hand and wave to her subjects below. But as their altitude rapidly decreased, she immediately sensed something was wrong. They were only 20 meters from the surface, but Will had no intention of slowing down. Instead, he accelerated towards the ocean. Char char. The dopey Charmander, however, didn't sense anything was wrong and was still dancing with excitement. Because Will was speeding up, it even hugged the nearby Liz and let out a cheer. Lan. Char char. Let's go for a dip. Will let out a long cry, and with Liz and Blaze in tow, he plunged headfirst into the ocean. The world instantly went quiet. Before his eyes was a world of azure, with all kinds of sea fish and seaweed, and an endless number of aquatic Pokémon from all over the world. This is, the all blue, Will thought, staring blankly at the underwater world, his brain shutting down for a moment. Chapter 55, Arriving at Jubilance Town. Although the oceans of this world are divided among different regions, they are ultimately one. The seas of each region are interconnected. Therefore, it wasn't strange at all to see aquatic Pokémon from other regions in the waters off the coast of Johto. From what Will could see right now, Tentacle, Seal, Shelter, Horsa, Seeking, Starmie, and Corsola were all Pokémon from the Kanto and Johto Pokédexes, the ones that were supposed to be here. They did indeed make up the vast majority of the Pokémon he saw. But beyond them, Will also spotted Carvanha, Corphish, Phoebus, Bizel, Finian, Basculin, and wishy-washy Pokémon categorized as being from other regions. The ocean truly allows you to experience the charm of distant lands. It was true. The ocean of the Pokémon world was bright and brimming with life. This world had not disappointed his expectations, in fact, its stunning beauty had surpassed his imagination. Liz, in this world, there must be so many more beautiful sights that we have yet to see. Will had only dipped into the water for a moment before flying back out. He hadn't forgotten that he was still carrying Liz and Blaze. He wasn't worried about the Charmander drowning, a Pokémon's life force is very resilient. Ash's Charizard, for example, could stay in the lake outside the Cherrysific Valley for a whole day and night. Fire types just disliked water, it wasn't that they couldn't enter it. They still came into contact with it when bathing, much like a cat being forced to take a shower. When Will returned to the sky above the sea, he expected Liz to scold him, but no sound came from behind him. He turned his head and saw that both Liz and Blaze were staring with their mouths and eyes wide open. "So beautiful," she murmured. "Char," Blaze echoed. They were still in a daze, their minds replaying the scene they had just witnessed. For the people of this era, the ocean was still a very dangerous and forbidden zone. Very few would risk their lives to go to sea, let alone see what it looked like beneath the waves. Liz had never seen it before, and neither, of course, had Blaze. "Lan! Look what you've done!" After a moment, Liz snapped back to her senses. She looked down at her drenched self and the pitiful-looking Charmander, then reached out and smacked Will's tail. "Ahaha, I just wanted to show you the sights underwater," Will replied nonchalantly. He was in an incredibly good mood because he had discovered the world's greatest training ground. Although the Dragonite line never had the water type, they could live in the water and learn many water-type moves. In the Pokédex entries across all versions, Dragonite's description was almost always tied to the sea. Therefore, the ocean was not only the largest training ground but also one that was perfectly suited for him. "Honestly, it's so cold. Let's hurry to the town," Liz said, hugging Blaze for warmth. It was already winter, and now she was soaked to the bone. All she wanted was a hot bath and a good rest in a soft bed. Sleeping in tents in the wild these past few days had been very uncomfortable. The snoring of the guards and the loud noises from the beasts turning over would often disturb her, worsening the quality of her sleep. Will nodded and flew them towards the nearby Jubilance town. He didn't need Liz to tell him where to go, he just headed straight for the most luxurious building in the center. The building itself looked like a large villa, completely incomparable to the royal palace in the capital. Liz, an old woman with graying hair, well over 50, stood in front of the villa. Her eyes were dim, and she couldn't clearly see Liz on Will's back, but she knew she was coming. She was the mayor of Jubilance Town. Others might not know what the queen's personal beast looked like, but how could she not? Even if she hadn't seen a portrait, she had heard countless descriptions of the Pokémon known as Dragonair. So, when she saw Will fly over the town, she knew Liz had arrived early. "Elder Barb." Liz's eyesight was quite good. She spotted the old woman calling to her at a glance and quickly waved. They landed. Liz went forward and shared a hug with Elder Barb, then retreated to Will's side. "This is Lan, and this is Blaze. They're my family. Ooh, they both look like very energetic children. But why are you soaked?" Elder Barb took a longer look at the massive Will, then frowned and tugged at Liz's dress. "Because Lan was being naughty," Liz said, poking Will and shaking her head helplessly, though the corners of her mouth turned up in a slight smile. "You two seem to be getting along very well. I haven't seen you look this happy in a long time," Elder Barb said with a smile, looking at Liz. She was not a member of the Dragonite clan, but she had been with them since long ago. She was once the personal maid to Liz's maternal grandmother and, much like Hestia, was someone who had grown up alongside her. "Granny, I'm cold," Liz suddenly said, putting on a pitiful expression. This display stunned Will for a moment. He had never seen her act like this. No, that's not right. He hadn't seen it in this life. He vaguely remembered that in his past life, when Liz was cold at night, she had looked at him just like this. But back then, she had just been a little girl. "Go take a hot bath. The water has already been drawn for you." "Where are the others?" Elder Barb asked, turning to lead them into the villa. Just as they entered, a giant 7-spotted ladybug flew over. "They're still on the road. Lan couldn't wait, so he brought me here first," Liz said, not surprised by the bug. She had seen it many times before. The first time was 15 years ago. At that time, the Dragonite Kingdom had not yet been established, and a 13-year-old Liz was still leading her beast caller troops to conquer other tribes. It was because of those efforts back then that the Johto region now had peace. And it was because of that experience that Liz understood that to achieve a longer-lasting peace, only one kingdom, hers or the kingdom of the land, could remain. The only difference was that back then, she had been the aggressor, and now, she was the defender. "A ladybug can be this big?" Will asked, a little shocked by the sight of the bug. Although a ladybug was a bug and looked small in the Pokédex, in the era of leagues its average length was already 1 meter. The ladybug clinging to Elder Barb's leg now was even more exaggerated. It was a full 2.5 meters long, and its height when crawling on the ground was greater than Blaze's. Char. Blaze, however, wasn't afraid. This kid was quite simple-minded and wasn't wary of other Pokémon. This was clear from his reaction when he first met Will. Unless a huge number of Pokémon or humans were gathered and staring at him at the same time, he wouldn't feel fear. Chapter 56, Liz's Plan. "This child was one I met when I was first assigned to Jubilance Town. The town is full of beasts like this," Elder Barb explained, seeing that both Will and Blaze were curious about the ladybug. "Well, that makes sense. Jubilance Town is fragrant with flowers and located in the south, it would certainly attract ladybug," Will nodded. It seemed he would be seeing quite a few of them in this town. However, he had no interest in them and didn't plan on capturing one to train. This wasn't to say that ladybug had no value. Any Pokémon in this world had its value, and any species could be trained to be incredibly powerful. Sakaki's Beedrill and Price's Delibird were both famous within the community. Many people might not remember, but both Professor Oak and Sakaki had trained and used a ladybug. Yes, a ladybug, not its evolution, Ledian. Therefore, Will's decision not to train a ladybug wasn't because it wasn't worth it. He knew his own judgment was far from that of Professor Oak or Boss Sakaki. He simply wasn't confident that he could guide Liz to raise a Pokémon like Ledian to that legendary level. As a novice trainer himself who also had to guide the rookie Liz, Will didn't dare to emulate the reckless strategies of the masters. He would still prioritize Pokémon with higher base stats and stronger innate potential. "Liz, what business brings you here this time? You should be aware of the current situation between the Dragonite Kingdom and the Kingdom of the Land, right?" "I am," Elder Barb nodded grimly. She was no ordinary old woman. She had been through life and death situations with Liz's grandmother and was not afraid of the mere mention of war. For now, the Kingdom of the Land does not wish to launch a full-scale war and is only maintaining friction with our country. I can guess the reason, and it suits my plans. The army is implementing a new beast training program, and we still need some time for it to take effect. So, how can Jubilance Town help?" Elder Barb asked with a frown. She felt that with its current scale, Jubilance Town couldn't provide much help on a direct battlefield. That left only one possibility, the sea route. There are many voices of discontent against the new king within the Kingdom of the Land. The Land King is delaying the war precisely because he needs to deal with these people. I want to make their internal strife last a little longer, and become a little more intense. Ideally, they will exhaust a large amount of their national strength on this civil war. At that time, I will take the initiative and conquer them in one fell swoop. I want to send people to infiltrate the Kingdom of the Land, secretly give those rebels some support, and cooperate with them to some extent. But the land routes are difficult. The Kingdom of the Land has very thorough patrols. However, they are not guarding the sea routes, likely because they think that, like them, we have not yet ventured into the ocean. I plan to send our people by sea. And when the war does break out, I want a route that will allow me to dispatch a portion of our beast callers to circle around by sea, set up ambushes along their line of march and in their rear, cut off their supplies, and encircle and annihilate their army in the valleys of the MT Silver Range. Liz calmly explained her plan to Elder Barb, who listened with a composed expression, nodding and occasionally offering her own opinions. It seemed she was not at all surprised by Liz's demeanor. Will, on the other hand, was deeply shaken. He had never known what Liz was doing, holed up in her study all day, mainly because he couldn't read the written language of this world. Now he understood. Liz hadn't been idle at all, she had made many preparations during this time. Blaze, we have to get stronger too. Char. I know, big bro. Blaze didn't understand why they had to get stronger, but he had to listen to what his big bro said. Only by being obedient could he learn to fly. He didn't know what else Liz and Elder Barb discussed after that, because the two of them went to the bathhouse together. Will was no longer a stranger to Liz's body, he had bathed with her all the time when he was a Dratini. However, he had no desire to see Elder Barb's torso, so he dragged Blaze off to get familiar with their new environment. Time flew by, and soon it was noon. Liz had been in discussion with Elder Barb the whole time. The plan was apparently very complex, with many unstable factors to consider. Will and Blaze waited boredly until the army caravan finally arrived. When he saw the pitiful, wronged expressions on the two Magikarp's faces, he felt a little embarrassed. Don't be sad. This afternoon, I'll take you to the ocean to level up, Will said, awkwardly flapping the feathery wings on his head. The two Magikarp were just too inconspicuous, like ordinary carp. If they had already evolved into Gyarados, he certainly wouldn't have forgotten about them. Char Blaze waved a hand, greeting his two new companions for the first time. Glub Glub X2. The two Magikarp's moods instantly brightened. Part of it was being distracted by their new friend, but more importantly, it was because they had heard the word ocean. Before being taken home by Will, they had only ever lived in that small lake on MT Silver. They were country fish. They had never even heard the word ocean before. But today, upon hearing it, although their minds were still blank, their hearts were filled with an inexplicable excitement and anticipation. The very genes in their bodies stirred at the word, as if it were the place they were always meant to be. Look forward to it, haha. I'm also looking forward to seeing your new forms, Will grinned at the two Magikarp. They were different from him. Their levels were already quite high, at least 15 or more. Their experience curve wasn't as ridiculous as his was now, and they only needed to reach around LV20 to evolve. So, it wouldn't take long to get them there. Char? What about me, big bro? Blaze gestured to himself. You wait until Liz has time to take you to fight the Lediba. She should understand by now that she needs to train you. When there's nothing else going on, you stick by her side and protect her, Will said. He couldn't be in two places at once. Besides, he had his own leveling to do, that was his top priority, bar none. Only when his own training plan was not interrupted would he help Liz train these other Pokémon. Char. I get it. Blaze nodded vigorously, then turned and immediately waddled off to find Liz. Liz is probably going to be very confused, Will couldn't help but smile as he watched Blaze leave. Liz would surely be curious as to why her new Pokémon was suddenly sticking so close to her. Because she had never raised a Pokémon before, her first being the very unconventional him, she wouldn't understand that for a Pokémon to stay by its trainer's side was the norm. A weirdo like him, who was always running off, was the exception. In fact, in his current state, he wasn't really Liz's Pokémon at all. Their relationship was more like that of family and friends. Liz and her Pokémon Blaze and the Magikarp, that was the true relationship of a trainer and her Pokémon. Chapter 57, Two Gyarados Underlings. The coastal waters of Jubilance Town were relatively shallow, with only a few dozen meters separating the sea's surface from the seabed. As Will entered the ocean with the two Magikarp, he could see many Krabby and Shelder wandering on the sand below. Generally, Krabby wouldn't stay in a place like this. They preferred to sunbathe on the sandy beaches of the coast. But they had no choice. In the kingdom period of the era of primal beasts, the relationship between humans and beasts was still not harmonious. It was even more intense in the preceding tribal period, where a Krabby that went ashore faced the mortal danger of being hunted for food. As a result, they now mostly stayed underwater. These guys probably don't have high levels, Will thought, losing interest after a quick glance. The nature of the Shelder species meant their levels were generally not high. They spent their entire lives avoiding conflict with other Pokémon. They wouldn't attack proactively, and when attacked, they would just close their shells and wait for the enemy to leave. Therefore, their only means of leveling up was through natural growth. It was only in the era of leagues that people would begin to train shelter and discover their value. As for the Krabby, he could deduce their strength from their evolution conditions. A Krabby only evolves into a Kingler at around LV28. Therefore, Will could basically conclude that all the Krabby he saw were below LV30, making them unsuitable targets. Let's go a little deeper. Will led his 2 Magikarp underlings, who now looked full of spirit, further into the sea. The Magikarp had been cooped up in those glass tanks for so long that they had started to develop a shut-in aura. Returning to the ocean, their spirits instantly lifted, their vibe changing from that of a nerdy shut-in to a popular extrovert. There were so many Pokémon in the ocean. No matter where he looked, there were dozens in his field of vision. So, after swimming just a dozen or so meters, he had already spotted several suitable opponents. Let's take out these 5 first. Will looked down at the sand below, where 5 good-sized Staryu were resting. A Staryu's Pokédex height is 0.8 meters, but the 5 before him were about 2.5 meters. Clearly, their levels were not low, at least LV25 or higher, but not exceeding LV40. A Pokémon that reached LV40 through natural growth would be quite old. The Ampharos chief, the Tauros chief, the Persian chief all were no exception. A wild Staryu was much like a shelter, it wouldn't actively attack other Pokémon, so it could only grow naturally. By the time they reached LV40, they would surely be on their last legs. And with his Pokémon senses, Will could tell that these 5 Staryu were not old. Glub glub? Are we fighting them? Liz's Magikarp asked, turning to Will. Iris's Magikarp on the other side also looked at him. Their minds were simple, they didn't consider the question of whether they could win or not. Yes. I'll attack first. When they're not paying attention, you two use tackle to sneak in some hits. This battle would mainly be him fighting 1v5. The Magikarp just needed to tag along for the experience. If he defeated these 5 Staryu, it should be enough to raise both Magikarp's levels by 2 or 3. With that said, Will whipped his tail and launched a twister. The huge vortex caused quite a commotion under the sea, and some of the fish and Pokémon that had been loitering nearby immediately fled. Smack! The twister was huge and hit all 5 Staryu at once, successfully enraging them. The red cores in their centers began to flash, and all 5 used water guns simultaneously. Will casually twisted his body to dodge, then used agility to close the distance. His speed in the water was even faster than on land. While the 5 Staryu were using water gun, the 2 Magikarp seized the opportunity, charged in, and thrashed about, getting in a few hits and officially participating in the battle. Get back! Get far away! Will immediately ordered the 2 Magikarp to leave, and then his body began to glow with a yellow light. Focus energy! Thunderbolt! BZZZZT! The brilliant golden electricity, conducted by the seawater, struck all 5 Staryu at once and triggered a critical hit. The red cores in their centers flickered and then went dim. They had lost the ability to battle. The nearby fish and shrimp that hadn't escaped in time, as well as the 2 Magikarp who had been a bit too slow, were also caught in the blast. Fortunately, they were only grazed by the stray sparks at the edge of the attack and weren't knocked out. Terrifying, Will grinned. He knew that broadening his move pool was the right choice. Learning Thunderbolt from the Ampharos chief had been a massive gain. The water pulse he had learned from the Golduck chief would also surely come in handy in the future. Let's continue. Will snapped back to his senses and led the 2 Magikarp to continue their conquest. They advanced victoriously, each time using Thunderbolt to take out 3 or 4 water-type Pokémon at once. By the time the afternoon was over, Will felt he had knocked out at least 30 water-type Pokémon. Thunderbolt! Will squeezed out the last of his electric energy, knocking out 2 Tentacruel. That's it. I can't use Thunderbolt anymore, Will panted, feeling a little tired. In game terms, his PP for Thunderbolt was depleted. Moreover, after fighting for a whole afternoon, he didn't have much stamina left. Today's training was over. I finally leveled up. After about half a month, Will had finally gained another level. Only he knew how difficult the process had been. It was a shame Iris wasn't here. Otherwise, he couldn't even imagine how many levels he could have gained during their stay in Jubilance Town. Hey! Suddenly, Will felt a blindingly strong light from behind him. He turned his head and was forced to close his eyes against the glare. When he opened them again, the two Magikarp were gone. In their place were two enormous and ferocious Gyarados. Whoa, the Gyarados of the era of primal beasts are ridiculous, Will couldn't help but gulp as he looked at the two behemoths. His own length was 9 meters, which was already terrifyingly long. You couldn't find many Pokémon longer than him. But these two Gyarados were even more absurd, reaching a length of 13 meters. And, growing proportionally to their Pokédex entries, their weight was probably around 470 kilograms, nearly half a ton. They were monsters. Who said Magikarp was weakened in ancient times? It evolves at LV20. After evolution, it has this ridiculous physique and a base stat total of 540. It's only weak to rock and electric. It can learn moves of 13 out of the 18 types. Its mega evolution reaches a BST of 640, crushing a host of lesser legendaries. And you call this weakened? If this was the weakened version, then in ancient times, the Gyarados line must have been the undisputed rulers of the world. Let's go. Let Liz see your new faces, Will said, staring at the two Gyarados. Their eyes held a deep, controlled ferocity, which meant they had their violent tempers well in check. It worked. Will knew his decision to suppress their levels and have Liz and Iris build a bond with them first had been the right one. Roar! X2. The two Gyarados let out a vigorous roar. The massive sound waves reverberated through the sea, scaring away many of the more timid Pokémon. Even some high-level ones didn't dare to approach. Will swam fast through the sea with his two new Gyarados underlings. The elegant and noble Dragonair, flanked by two domineering and mighty Gyarados. No matter how you looked at it, the scene was beautiful. Chapter 58, How on earth did you recognize him? Liz was in the middle of discussing strategy with Elder Barb in the mayor's home when a soldier burst in, reporting that 3 giant primal beasts had rushed into the town, though they had not yet caused any casualties. Giant. Liz's first thought was of her Lan. Will's body was 9 meters long, even when standing on the ground, he was over 3 meters tall. But when she registered the number 3, she figured it couldn't be him. Take me to them. I'm going to. Liz stood up and followed behind Elder Barb. Char Blaze trotted along by Liz's leg, one small hand clutching the hem of her dress as he looked around warily. Any creature that dared to approach Liz would have to suffer the flames that would destroy the world. Rua. Elder Barb and Liz followed the guard and quickly arrived at the scene. When they saw what was happening, both of their expressions turned strange. Blaze also dazedly let go of Liz's dress. There, Will stood calmly, surveying the army of beast callers that had surrounded them. Beside him, 2 ferocious-looking, giant blue beasts were glaring at the army, looking extremely agitated. Lord Lan has brought back more strange beasts. Indeed. The others were one thing, but these two are just too much. They look incredibly ferocious and difficult to tame. We absolutely cannot let them get near Lady Liz. What do we do? Should we attack? No. Lord Lan is still in there. If he gets hurt, Lady Liz will be furious. You didn't see the look on her face that day. The soldiers of the Beast Caller army murmured amongst themselves. They had just arrived in Jubilance Town that afternoon and hadn't even had a proper rest before being faced with this scene. It was exhausting. And the sheer size of the two Gyarados was overwhelming, the pressure they gave off made the soldiers feel like each one could take on 10 of them. You're finally here. Any slower and these two might have gone berserk, Will said, sighing in relief when he saw Liz appear. When a Magikarp evolves into a Gyarados, the structure of its brain cells is reorganized, causing its personality to become violent and irritable. With so many people and Pokémon directing hostility towards them, of course the two Gyarados would get angry. If Will hadn't been there, they might have already started a rampage. Of course, that wasn't the main point. The main point was that Will was afraid the army would kill the two Gyarados. Right now, they looked intimidating, but their actual combat power wasn't that high. In the human world, if two 1.8 meter, 140-pound men collided, it might be an even match. But in the Pokémon world, if a LV40, 0.4 meter, 6 kg Pikachu and a LV20, 13 meter, 470 kg Gyarados both used tackle on each other, the Gyarados would undoubtedly be the one to lose consciousness on the spot, or even die. This was the world of Pokémon, a magical world governed by levels, types, moves, and abilities. Did height and weight have no use in battle at all? Of course they did, but their contribution was small compared to other factors. If a Pikachu and a Gyarados of the same level used tackle, the Gyarados might have the upper hand, thanks to its weight. Lan. Liz pushed past the surrounding guards and walked straight forward. Lady Liz! Char! A guard tried to stop her, but Blaze roared at him, and he quickly pulled his hand back. It's fine, Liz said with a wave of her hand. She trusted that Lan would not bring a truly dangerous beast into town, let alone right in front of her. Besides, these two beasts gave her a strange feeling. It was just, not that dangerous. It was a complete contradiction. Her eyes were telling her that these two behemoths were extremely dangerous and that she shouldn't get close. But her heart was telling her that they meant her no harm, and that she could approach them. Liz didn't know if it was her imagination, but she thought she could see a hint of affection in the eyes of the giant beast to Will's left. Hey, take a good look at these two. See if you recognize them, Will said, patting the Gyarados beside him with his tail. Roar! Liz's Gyarados did its best to lower its head, bringing its massive, ferocious face closer to her. Liz was still a little scared looking at that savage head and giant mouth. But seeing that Will wasn't reacting, she gathered her courage and reached out to pat the Gyarados' head in a friendly gesture. You don't recognize him, do you? Gyarados, show Liz your specialty. The move you did most often in front of her. Seeing Liz's reaction, Will knew she hadn't figured it out. So, he decided to have the Gyarados help. When a Magikarp evolves, its physical and mental capabilities undergo a qualitative change, including its intelligence. Although Gyarados are irritable, that doesn't mean they're stupid. It could now understand more complex phrases. Roar! The Gyarados nodded. Then, under the watchful eyes of the entire crowd, it flopped onto the ground and began to thrash about, twisting its body. Flap, flap, flap. Its giant tail slammed against the ground, kicking up clouds of dust, looking for all the world like a drowning fish. Will. Liz. Blaze. Everyone else. The crowd stared blankly at the Gyarados' seizure-like performance. Carp. Liz's eyes went wide. She clapped a hand over her open mouth. How on earth did you recognize him? Will stared at Liz in disbelief. The Gyarados' actions were completely absurd, but Liz had actually recognized it. What? That's the red fish. Didn't the beast scholars say it was a useless beast? That thing can evolve into something so powerful. Lady Liz must have known all along. Yes, just look at Lord Lan. Lady Liz is the most visionary and insightful beast scholar in the world. I will never again question the choices of Lady Liz and Lord Lan. Upon learning the true identity of the two Gyarados, the members of the Beast Caller army all lowered their weapons and calmed their own Pokémon. Char. Blaze, snapping out of his daze, also looked at his two newly acquainted companions in shock. He hadn't expected that in just one afternoon, they would have become so tall and mighty. Char. Blaze looked at the two giant Gyarados with envy, then quickly ran to Will's side and patted him anxiously. Don't worry. If you're a good boy, you'll get bigger and taller too, and you'll even be able to fly. Char. Blaze nodded vigorously and puffed out his chest. Nearby, Liz was observing the Gyarados' impressive form in astonishment. Roar! The Gyarados squinted its eyes happily, letting Liz look him over. If a stranger were to stare at him like this, he would have long since gotten angry and sent them flying with a tail whip. But it was okay if it was Liz. Not only did he let her look, but he even stretched his body so she could get a better view. Roar! The other Gyarados, the one belonging to Iris, could only watch this scene with envy. It turned its head and looked to the north, in the direction of the capital. We'll be back in a few days. You can see Iris then. Roar! The Gyarados nodded, though its mood was still not great. Chapter 59, Room and Board Provided. In the dead of night, after eating his fill, Will was faced with a problem. The bed was too small for him to sleep on. Their new, larger bed was 2.5 meters, but that was hardly enough for Will's 9-meter length. He had to coil most of his body, which was still very crowded and uncomfortable. But no matter the situation, Liz never considered sleeping separately from Will. The thought of finding a separate room for him or building a large pool never even crossed her mind. She had grown accustomed to sleeping while hugging the soft Will and didn't want to be apart. The Gyarados, however, were another story. Chapter 58, How on earth did you recognize him? Their size and weight were too extreme, a simple turn in their sleep could cause considerable damage. So, for now, they had to stay in the shallow coastal waters of Jubilance Town, which they were more than happy to do. The winter nights in Jubilance Town brought sea winds that were even more ferocious than during the day. Crash! Tinkle, tinkle! Will, who was sleeping soundly, was suddenly startled awake by a loud, sharp noise. He instantly opened his eyes and looked to the side. The bedroom window had shattered into pieces on the floor. Lying among the shards was a purple, tongue-lolling Pokémon. A Gligar. Will's eyes widened as he watched the Gligar on the floor rub its head and stand up. This Gligar was not small. It was a full 2 meters long, nearly double the Pokédex value. Its level must be quite high. However, a Gligar doesn't stand that tall, at least a meter of that length was its tail. Without the tail, it was probably only about a meter high. Even so, the size of this Gligar felt off to Will. The Gligar he remembered from the anime was a tiny thing, not even reaching Ash's mid-thigh. Glee! After getting up, the Gligar was startled by the sight of the massive Will. It quickly put its pincers together in a gesture of apology. It assumed it had intruded on Will's territory and was afraid of being eaten. After all, Will was enormous. It felt that if it didn't apologize properly, it was doomed. Will looked down, silently staring at the Gligar without a word. Cold sweat began to form on the Gligar's forehead, but it didn't dare make a move. In reality, Will was considering whether he should help Liz capture this Gligar. Gligar are numerous but not commonly seen. They can be found in most regions except for Kanto, Hone, and Galar, but their colonies usually live on high cliffs near the clouds, places that are difficult for ordinary people to reach. So, seeing and catching one was not an easy task. Moreover, Gligar's evolution, Gliscor, was very strong. Its power didn't just come from its 510 base stat total, but also from its unique ground/flying typing. Of the 18 types, it was immune to the popular ground and electric types, and was only weak to water, 2x, and ice, 4x, with no other shortcomings. A 4x weakness to ice is the mark of a true powerhouse. But, where would I find a Razor Fang? The reason for Will's hesitation was Gligar's evolution requirement. It needed the item Razor Fang. But where could he find one in this reality? You'll have to compensate, Will decided after a moment. He would keep the Gligar for now. Even if it couldn't evolve, a Gligar's typing was still an advantage, even if it was a bit weaker. Besides, there was still plenty of time. He could check the palace treasury when they got back, maybe he'd find one there. The Dragonite Kingdom's army was always exploring the MT Silver Range and often brought back strange items. Glee! The Gligar paused, then nodded vigorously. Lan! Liz's voice came from under the covers. The series of noises had woken her up. Blaze, on the other hand, was still sleeping like a log. Not only was he not awake, but the flame on his tail was burning even brighter. He was probably having an exciting dream. I want you to become her underling. You will listen to her from now on, Will said, indicating the groggily sitting up Liz. Glee? Gligar. Her? No way. I, Gligar, have unyielding bones. I will never submit to a human. The Gligar looked at Liz, frowned as if disgusted by her weakness, and then shook its head in resolute refusal. Will fell silent. He hadn't expected this Gligar to be so hard to fool, unlike Blaze. It must have been alive for some time. Grumble, grumble. Suddenly, a loud rumbling sound came from the Gligar's stomach. She can give you delicious food and a warm nest, Will offered. A simple translation, room and board provided. Gligar. I was born to be her underling. The Gligar's eyes lit up. It immediately dropped to one knee and pledged its loyalty to Liz. Hey! Liz, now fully awake, looked at the scene before her and tilted her head in confusion. Will stared at the Gligar, wondering where it had learned such a human-like gesture. It was the first time he had seen such a humanized Pokémon. He had to take back his previous assessment. This Gligar wasn't hard to fool, Will just hadn't been using the right bait. Whoosh! A fierce sea breeze blew in through the broken window, making Liz shiver. Lan, it's cold, she mumbled, shrinking back under the covers and hugging the warm blaze. As for the Gligar, she seemed to have already filtered it out of her perception. Come with me, Will said, looking out the window. The winter night clouds were thick, obscuring the starlight. He guessed that the Gligar had been caught in a strong gust of wind, lost control of its trajectory, and glided right into their room. Although Gligar has the flying type, they can't truly fly, they can only glide. The advantage of gliding is that it's silent, but the disadvantage is that it's easily affected by the wind. A skilled Gliscor would have no fear of strong winds, but an inexperienced Gligar could easily be blown off course. Gligar. The Gligar nodded. Will used his tail to wrap up Liz, Blaze, and the blankets, moving them to the next room. He then took the Gligar to the kitchen. As someone who was also raising a Pokémon, Elder Barb naturally kept food for them on hand. It was a collection of fragrant flowers and berries, likely Letty Ba's favorite. Will wasn't interested and tossed it to the Gligar. Glee, the Gligar picked it up and started gnawing. It looked like it hadn't had a good meal in a long time. After it had eaten its fill, Will brought the Gligar back to the bedroom to sleep. The rest could wait until morning. The next day, Liz went to find Elder Barb in the main hall. What is this? Barb asked, looking blankly at the Gligar by Liz's left leg, then at the Charmander by her right. If the two hadn't appeared together, she would have thought the Charmander had mutated. This is Scorp, Liz said, her expression unchanged. Her own mindset had changed quite a bit. She was no longer surprised by a strange beast suddenly appearing by her side. When she woke up and saw the purple beast in her room, she hadn't been scared at all. She vaguely remembered Will talking to it last night. Since Will had kept it by her side, she instinctively understood his meaning. It was a good feeling. Liz truly believed that. With these children by her side, she had completely forgotten the taste of loneliness. The winter morning even seemed to have become warmer. And a bit smoky. Liz. Elder Barb suddenly said, her head down. Yes. Your dress is on fire. Blaze. Chapter 60, An Unexpected Find. After breakfast, Liz, for a rare change, had nothing on her schedule and suggested that she and Will's group go out for a stroll. Will agreed without a second thought and led her to the seaside beach. In the winter, the beach is not an ideal vacation spot. In the 5 major, interconnected regions of Kanto, Johto, Hone, Sinnoh, and the Orange Islands, Johto is in the west and Kanto is in the east. These two are on the same line and are both temperate regions. Sinnoh is in the north of the Pokémon world, belonging to the frigid zone. Hone and the Orange Islands are in the southwest and southeast, respectively, entering the subtropical zone. Hone is closer to Johto, while the Orange Islands are directly below Kanto. As for other regions like Unova, Kalos, Alola, Galar, and Paldea, they are much farther away. If you want a beach vacation in the winter, the most suitable place is the tropical Alola region, followed by the southern parts of Hone and the Orange Islands. In any case, the southernmost coast of the Johto region was still quite cold. On the beach of Jubilance Town. So cool, so soft. Be careful not to get your feet cut on a seashell. Will strolled along the beach with Liz, turning to see her carrying her cotton shoes, walking barefoot on the sand. With them were the 2 Gyarados, Blaze, Scorp, and Elder Barb with her Letty Ba. It felt nice, walking on the beach together. This is the life I've always wanted. Will couldn't help but smile as he watched Blaze and Scorp chasing each other and playing up ahead. Since Liz wanted to relax for a day, Will didn't rush to take the 2 Gyarados out for training. If not for the threat of war, perhaps Will really would have tried to live a lazy life, doing what he wanted and freeloading off Liz until he died of old age. Lan, what do you think is on the other side of the sea? The enemy, Will answered helplessly, sweating a little. He wasn't just playing with the Attack on Titan reference. In this era of primal beasts, the other side of the sea really was the enemy. Enemies from the Hone region, perhaps another human kingdom. If they discovered each other's existence, it would likely mean another war. That's just how humans were. When will peace ever come? Sigh. X2. Will and Liz sighed at the same time, then looked at each other in surprise. Did Lan just say something similar to what I was thinking? Liz asked, her eyes wide. She felt as if she had just understood his voice, that he was also worrying about a peace that seemed so far away. We said the exact same thing, Will replied. He was surprised that he and Liz had developed such a rapport without even realizing it. It's okay. With you by my side, working with me, peace will surely come. I hope so, Will said, though he wasn't very optimistic. It was still very, very early. This was only the middle period of the era of primal beasts. The peaceful era of leagues was at least 1,000 years away. He could live to see it, but could Liz? Char. Just then, Blaze seemed to have found something and came running over excitedly, holding a large, pink pearl. Scorp followed behind, slowly carrying a large, tightly closed clamshell, which looked very heavy. "Oh? What's this? It's so pretty," Liz said, bending down to take the pink pearl from Blaze's hand. It had a diameter of 20 centimeters, it was quite large. Will frowned. He was more concerned about the large clamshell Scorp was carrying than the pearl Liz was holding. That thing didn't look like an empty, dead shell. Scorp dropped the heavy shell on the ground, gave Liz a fawning wink, and then patted the shell beside it. Thump! Thump! Clam, pearl! A sad, whimpering voice came from inside the shell. "Hey, how can you two just steal someone else's things? Are you robbers?" Will's mind went blank for a moment, then he had a sudden realization. This was a clam pearl from the Hone region. It had somehow ended up on the coast of Johto, only to have its precious pearl stolen by Blaze and Scorp. "Hey? Is this a beast?" Liz was also surprised to hear the voice coming from the shell. She was discovering that her Pokémon seemed to have a habit of picking up other Pokémon. "We have to give this back to it," Will said, using his tail to take the pearl from Liz's hand and placing it on the ground in front of the large shell. This pearl was extremely important to a clam pearl. When it prepares to evolve, it creates a magical pearl that can enhance its psychic power. It relies on this pearl, along with a deep sea tooth or a deep sea scale, to complete its evolution. If the pearl is taken away beforehand, the clam pearl will never be able to evolve. Only after it evolves does the pearl lose its value to it. Generally, most clam pearls are sold at a high price, perhaps 10 times more valuable than a Shelder's pearl. The buyers are usually trainers with psychic-type Pokémon, or specifically, trainers of Spoink. This pearl has the effect of increasing a Spoink's psychic power, and they are always searching for such large pearls. It could be said that whoever has this pearl can capture a Spoink. Clam. Hearing the noise, the clam pearl pitifully opened its shell a crack. Only after seeing its pearl did it open up a little more. Upon seeing Will, it was so scared that it immediately slammed its shell shut again. But when it saw that nothing happened, it cautiously peeked out again. "Here you go," Will said, placing the pearl back inside the clampearl shell. Liz, Blaze, and the others just watched from the side. The clam pearl sighed in relief, seeing the pearl return to it, and expressed its gratitude to Will. "It's nothing," Will said casually. It was Blaze and Scorp who had stolen its important belonging in the first place. After returning the pearl, Will was about to take Liz and the others for a stroll elsewhere. But at that moment, the clam pearl quickly called out to him. "Clam pearl." The clam pearl closed its shell, and when it opened again, a crystal-clear blue gem had appeared beside it. It looked like a teardrop. "A mystic water. Are you giving this to me?" "Clam pearl." The clam pearl nodded. "Thank you." Will didn't stand on ceremony. He used the tip of his tail to pick up the small drop and swallowed it without a second thought. A mystic water. Carrying this item could increase the power of water-type moves by 20%. To think he would get one here. It would have been better to give it to the Gyarados, since they were water types. But the effect wouldn't be bad on him either. He could learn many water-type moves and already had Aqua Tail and Water Pulse. He would never hesitate to prioritize his own strength first. The Gyarados underlings would have to wait their turn. As for whether he would digest it or excrete it, that was a problem for another day. In any case, a mystic water was an inconvenient item to carry around, it was easy to lose. Swallowing it was the safest option. In the games, players could indeed get a mystic water in the future Cherry Grove City, but it was a gift from a man. Now, in reality, he had unexpectedly received one from a clam pearl. Perhaps, if this clam pearl hadn't met him today, its mystic water would have been obtained by some stranger, passed down through generations as a family heirloom, and finally ended up in the hands of that man in Cherry Grove City, to be given to the player.
Thanks for listening.